Chapter 686. Mother Sure looked at Jean Hauser with a probing gaze. Facing her gaze, Jean Hauser was much calmer. "Hello, Auntie." "Yes, I'm Jean Hauser. One just woke up and is inside." Jean Hauser took a step back as he spoke and gestured for Mother Sure to enter the door. Mother Sure entered the house, but she wasn't in a hurry to see her daughter. Instead, he sized up Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser. She didn't expect Jean Hauser to be such a handsome young man. Look at his clothes and the way he talks. There was also the feeling that came from his body. Such a man was actually with her daughter? However, Mother Sure's hesitation didn't last long. She was still carrying bags of things in her hands. Jean Hauser took the initiative to take them and place them on the coffee table beside him. "Auntie, do you want to see Wan? Okay." Mother Sure decided to see her daughter first. Jean Hauser followed behind Mother Sure into the room. As soon as he entered the room, he remembered. There was a pile of broken pieces on the ground as well as the porridge on the ground. That messy scene did not look good at all. Jean Hauser was a little awkward. Mother Sure looked at him and then at Shi Mingwan. Her eyes were instantly on high alert. "Mom?" When Shi Mingwan saw Mother Sure appear, she held her forehead with her hand and felt that it was really over. "Why are you here?" She hadn't fully recovered from her illness, so her voice sounded weak. Mother Sure was very worried, but looking at the mess on the ground, she went down first. "Lie down first. We'll talk later." Mother Sure stepped forward. She was used to cleaning up. Even if he wasn't familiar with this place. In just a few moments, the floor was cleaned up. He was afraid that Shi Mingwan would step on the debris when she got down, so he carefully scanned the room and cleaned it completely. Then he sat in front of Shi Mingwan's bed again. After a while, Jean Hauser scooped another bowl of porridge and placed it on the bedside table. "Auntie, you came at the right time. Wan hasn't had breakfast yet." Mother Sure was very old. When she saw the mess on the ground, she knew that something had happened between the two of them. She glanced at Jean Hauser with an unfathomable expression. "Mr. Jean, right? Could you please go out first? I want to talk to Wan for a bit." "Of course." Jean Hauser nodded and left after glancing at Shi Mingwan. Only Shi Mingwan and her daughter were left in the room. Mother Sure picked up the bowl of porridge and looked at her daughter with a little heartache. "Why are you sick? Why didn't you tell me? Didn't you know that I would be worried? How can people not get sick from eating grains? It's not a big deal." Shi Mingwan reached out to take the bowl, but Mother Sure didn't let her and directly fed her a spoonful of porridge. Mother Sure focused on feeding the porridge and Shi Mingwan focused on eating the porridge. After a while she saw the bottom. Shi Mingwan looked like she didn't want to drink anymore, so Mother Sure put down the bowl. "Tell me what's going on?" Mother Sure pouted and looked outside the door. "Nothing, that's all." Shi Mingwan didn't want to say more. She didn't expect Jean Hauser to pick up her call, nor did she expect Jean Hauser to be bumped into by Mother Sure. Either way, it was not a situation she wanted to see. She didn't know how to answer her mother's question. "Your boyfriend? Why haven't I heard you mention this before? How long have you known each other? Where is he from? What does he do?" He even went on a blind date with Xiaoqi during the New Year. At that time, she didn't know this person yet. It seemed like she met him later on. "Mom, are you checking my household registration? Shouldn't I check my daughter's boyfriend?" If Mother Sure didn't see that Shi Mingwan was still sick, she would have poked her in the head to see what she was thinking. "Are you going to say it yourself or do you want me to go out and ask him?" "Mom?" Shi Mingwan was a little annoyed. She was thinking about breaking up with Jean Hauser. She had already made up her mind. Who knew that her illness would give Jean Hauser a chance? It wasn't that she wasn't angry, but she couldn't reveal anything in front of her mother. "Mom, his name is Jean Hauser. I haven't known him for long. He runs a company." "Haven't known him for long?" Mother Sure wasn't an idiot. "You haven't known him for long and you've already let him enter the house? Are you living together?" "Mom?" Shi Mingwan's face was red. She was too embarrassed to answer. "Can you stop asking?" "How can I not ask? Tell me this, child." Mother Sure was also anxious. Ever since Shi Mingwan was young, other than the time she ran away from home, she had never worried about her. She also knew that Shi Mingwan had always been proud. The last time she said that in front of Grandma Sure, she probably had to do it. But looking at Jean Hauser, how could he look like a man who was willing to marry into the family and let his child take someone else's surname? Shi Mingwan probably couldn't control such a man. "Mingwan, what's going on with you?" Mother Sure was referring to the mess when she came in. Why did these two people look a little off? "Mom, can you leave it alone?" Shi Mingwan was really annoyed. She wanted to get rid of Jean Hauser, But she didn't know that not only did she not get rid of him, but she also got herself deeper and deeper into it. It wasn't easy for her to make up her mind, but who knew that such a thing would happen again? You child. Shi Mingwan had been stubborn since she was young. Mother Shi wanted to say a few words to her, but she knew that this child couldn't be too serious. If you don't want to say it, then you can rest first. What do you want to eat for lunch? Mom will make it for you. Anything. Shi Mingwan really didn't mean to go against Mother Shi, but she was also in a mess right now. She really didn't know what to say. Mother Shi looked at her and sighed silently. She took the bowl and went out. John Hauser was in the living room. He seemed to be on the phone. Hearing Mother Shi come out, he hung up the phone. Mother Shi put the bowl in the kitchen and looked at the kitchen. There was no smell of smoke. It seemed that they didn't cook much. John Hauser stood at the kitchen door. Auntie, have you eaten? I've eaten. Mother Shi looked in the direction of the living room. John Hauser understood and the two of them walked outside together. Mother Shi sat down on the sofa and gestured for John Hauser to sit down as well. Compared to usual, John Hauser was sitting very upright. His hands were on his knees and he looked like he was sitting upright. Mother Shi's brows twitched slightly, and she sized up John Hauser again. Her eyes were long and deep. Although she tried her best to restrain herself when she looked at people, she was still very imposing. Mother Shi was from a small town. The most powerful person she had seen in the past was only the county head of their county. Today, when she saw John Hauser, she had a feeling that the person in front of her wasn't an ordinary person. How old is Mr. Jean this year? Auntie, just call me Hauser. I'm 29 years old this year. Where does Mr. Jean work? Mother Shi didn't answer him. This form of address was still a little unfamiliar and polite. I've opened 2 small companies of my own. In addition, I also have a small business under my name. Jean Hauser spoke modestly, but Mother Shi wasn't as relaxed as he thought. Instead, her gaze became more and more wary and distant. Shi Mingwan had been beautiful since she was young. She was afraid that the man in front of her had bad intentions. When did Mr. Jean and Wanwan meet? I've known Wanwan for a long time. Mother Shi was stunned for a moment. She recalled what Shi Mingwan had said to her before. You've known each other for a long time? But Wanwan didn't have a boyfriend during the new year. If she didn't know that Shi Mingwan didn't have a boyfriend, why would she arrange for her to go on a blind date with Xiaoqi? I met Wanwan last year, but we only got together recently. In other words, you haven't been together for long? Jean Hauser didn't avoid Mother Shi's question. Instead, he was quite calm. I haven't been together for a long time, but I feel that 2 people aren't together based on the length of time. Some people don't understand each other even after being together for a lifetime. But some people can hit it off at first sight. It can be seen that the depth of a relationship can't be measured by the length of time they've known each other. What do you think? Mother Shi reluctantly accepted Jean Hauser's explanation, but she asked, then according to Mr. Jean, you're sincere about Wanwan? Yes. Jean Hauser nodded. His answer was extremely firm. Mother Shi's expression was a little more relaxed than before. Her gaze fell on Jean Hauser and swept across him. Finally, as if she had made up her mind, she spoke softly. Mr. Jean, has Wanwan told you about our family's situation? I wonder what you're referring to, Auntie? I don't think Wanwan will tell you. Since that's the case, I'll tell you. Mother Shi's greatest regret in her life was that she didn't have a son, but after having 2 daughters, that regret wasn't a regret anymore. In her heart, nothing could compare to her 2 daughters. My husband, Wanwan's father, is the eldest in the family. There are 2 more brothers. After I married her father, I only gave birth to Wanwan and her younger sister. When I gave birth to Wanwan's younger sister, Wanwan's grandmother was very unhappy and wanted me to send Wanwan's younger sister away, to give birth to another son. At that time Wanwan was very unhappy. Because of this, she even ran away from home to protest. Jean Hauser's eyes darkened when he heard this, but it was only for a moment. Soon, he sat there expressionlessly and listened to Mother Shi. After she ran away from home, her father and I slowly got over it. What son? How can he be more important than a daughter? When Mother Shi said this, she thought of her daughter's wandering time outside for more than a year, and her expression didn't look good. After Wanwan returned home, her father and I also gave up on the idea of having another child. It's just that we don't want to have another child, but Wanwan's grandmother doesn't think so. She briefly recounted what Shi Mingwan said when Grandmother Shi came looking for her that day. Mother Shi had been paying attention to Jean Hauser's expression. That's how it is. Jean Hauser was expressionless, and Mother Shi couldn't figure out what he was thinking. Wanwan agreed. If she finds a partner and asks the male lead to marry into her family, the child she gives birth to will have Wanwan's surname? Mother Sure paused for a moment and realized that John Hauser was still expressionless. She could only continue, I know that a normal man wouldn't agree to such a condition. I don't mean anything else by saying so much. I just want to say that if you agree, then you can continue dating Wanwan. If you don't agree, I think you should just forget about your relationship. After all, if time passes and your relationship deepens, everyone will be in pain. Mother Sure had never taken what Shi Mengwan said that day seriously. She had never thought of letting Shi Mengwan marry into her family. She had even thought that if Shi Mengwan met a man she really liked one day, and the other party really wouldn't agree to her conditions, for the sake of Shi Mengwan's happiness, she was willing to take a step back and adopt her brother-in-law's child. She was very open-minded. She had no objections to what kind of man Shi Mengwan found and what kind of man she was with. It was just that she saw John Hauser today. Such a man was definitely not her ideal son-in-law. The most important thing was the mess she saw just now. Her daughter had never been an unreasonable person. She wouldn't make a fuss until the porridge was knocked over. No matter who started it first, it meant that the couple was in conflict now. Her daughter was her flesh and blood, so she would always protect her. That was why she wanted to say what Shi Mengwan said. It was for no other reason than to make things difficult for John Hauser. John Hauser hadn't said anything, so Mother Sure couldn't tell what she felt. There was disappointment and there was also bitterness. Her daughter was good in every way, but John Hauser wasn't willing to answer her, which made her feel a little dissatisfied. At this point, if Mr. Jean can't make a decision, why don't we just let it go? After all, if they're not suitable, forcing them to be together will only increase each other's pain. Moreover, with Mr. Jean's talent, I believe that Mr. Jean won't have to worry about not being able to find a partner. Auntie. Jean Hauser finally spoke. I know everything you said. I think there's no problem. Huh? It was Mother Sure's turn to be stunned. What do you mean? I mean I agree to marry into your family. I don't mind giving birth to a child with the surname Sure. Mother Sure's mouth was wide open. She suddenly realized that she had lost her composure. She cleared her throat. Mr. Jean is a man. He doesn't want to make random promises to make an old woman like me happy. Auntie. I'm not making random promises. I'm serious. Jean Hauser's voice wasn't loud, but his sincere words made Mother Sure speechless. Can Mr. Jean take responsibility for what he said? Of course. A man's words can't be taken back. Since I dared to promise you, I can naturally take responsibility for what I said. Mother Sure, who didn't expect such an answer, finally looked at Jean Hauser differently. She thought for a moment and couldn't help but speak. When I came in just now, I saw the porridge spilled. Can I ask what happened? Jean Hauser didn't seem surprised by Mother Sure's question. It's my fault. Wanwan has been with me for a long time, but I haven't brought her to see my family. Wanwan might be unhappy because of this. Mother Sure didn't completely believe Jean Hauser's words. Then why didn't you bring Wanwan to see your family? Jean Hauser was silent. He crossed his hands on his knees and lowered his eyes, as if he found it difficult to speak. My mother has already passed away. After my mother passed away, my father married someone else. Then my relationship with my father wasn't good. So, Jean Hauser didn't finish his sentence, but Mother Sure seemed to understand what he meant. I see. Yes. Jean Hauser looked up at Mother Sure. In fact, I know about Wanwan's knot, but I'm not close to my father. So, I don't think my father has to participate in my life's important matters. Mother Sure nodded as if she could understand Jean Hauser's thoughts. That's true, but he's your family after all. It's better to talk about some things properly. Yes, I will. Jean Hauser nodded as if he didn't object to Mother Sure's words. At this moment, Mother Sure felt some sympathy for Jean Hauser. His biological mother died early and his father married someone else. As the saying goes, if you have a stepmother, you will have a stepfather. Since Jean Hauser's father married someone else, he couldn't be very good to Jean Hauser. This way, it was normal for Jean Hauser to have a knot in his heart and not want to bring Shi Mengwan home. She knew her daughter's temper a little. She was afraid that Shi Mengwan would feel that Jean Hauser didn't value her. In this way, it wasn't entirely Jean Hauser's responsibility. Hauser, I'm not afraid to tell you the truth. Wanwan has had a bad temper since she was young. Both her father and I spoil her too much and we spoil her rotten. Since you can even accept the condition of marrying into the family, it means that you're sincere to Wanwan. I believe that since Wanwan let you marry into the family, it means that she also has feelings for you. Since that's the case, you two should get along well. You should understand each other. In just a short while, Mother Sure had even changed the way she addressed him. It was obvious that she had already confirmed Jean House's feelings. Jean House's expression didn't change, but he felt much more relaxed. "Annie, don't worry. I know." Mother Sure nodded. Although having such a son-in-law wasn't part of her plan, it really gave birth to a mother-in-law looking at her son-in-law. The more she looked at him, the more interesting it became. Looking at the time, she stood up. "I brought some local specialties from home. Is Hausa still going out today?" "No need." Jean Hausa wouldn't say that he still had a bunch of company matters to deal with. Mother Sure was satisfied. She nodded. "Okay, I'll go buy some groceries. Let's have lunch together." This was considered as acknowledging Jean Hausa's identity. "How can I let Auntie buy groceries? Let's go out for lunch. Wanwan likes to eat the food I cook. Besides, Wanwan hasn't recovered from her illness, so it's not suitable for her to go out for those oily foods." "Then I'll go buy groceries?" Jean Hausa stood up as well. Mother Sure looked at his eager expression and couldn't help but laugh. "No need you accompany Wanwan. I've been here before, so I know where the market is." As she spoke, she pouted and looked in the direction of the room. "Wanwan seems to still be angry. Go coax her. She has a bad temper. Since you've decided to be with her, be more tolerant." "I will. Don't worry, Auntie." Chapter 687. Jean Hausa wanted to ask Tang Hua to arrange for someone to send her off, but he was afraid that he would scare Mother Sure, so he could only give up after thinking about it. He turned around and went into the room. Sure Mingwan's fever had subsided. It was just that she was still listless and couldn't muster up any energy. After Mother Sure went out, she fell asleep in a daze for a while. Just now, Jean Hausa was chatting with Mother Sure outside. Because the door was closed and the sound wasn't loud, he didn't wake her up. Jean Hausa entered the door and placed his hand on her forehead. After making sure that her fever had subsided and that there was no big problem, he sat down by the bed. He just looked at Shi Mingwan's sleeping face. When she was asleep, she wasn't as beautiful as when she was awake. Because of her illness, her face was pale, making her look delicate and pitiful. His hand unconsciously caressed her cheek as he thought about Mother Sure's words just now. Looking for a son-in-law? This seemed like something Shi Mingwan would say and do. He was a little lost in thought, but his hand didn't move away from Shi Mingwan's face. Shi Mingwan didn't sleep well at first, but now that she felt someone touching her, she naturally thought it was Mother Sure. She wasn't fully awake yet. She rubbed her face against the person's hand and didn't open her eyes. "Mom, I'm so thirsty. Pour me a glass of water." Jean Hausa looked at the dependence she inadvertently revealed. It was something she didn't have when facing him. He retracted his hand and looked at her deeply. He got up and went out to pour water. He poured water in. One hand was placed behind her, as if to help her up. Shi Mingwan yawned and still had her eyes closed. She drank half of the water from the hand that the other party handed over, but she suddenly realized that something was wrong. Her mother didn't have the strength to support her body with one hand and feed her water with the other. She suddenly opened her eyes and looked at the person. When she realized that it was Jean Hausa, her eyes widened. "Why is it you? Where's my mom? Didn't he leave?" When she went out, she was still thinking that her mother would see her half-hearted attitude. She would definitely chase him away. She didn't expect him to not leave. "Your mom went to buy groceries. She said that you like her cooking." Jean Hausa put the cup aside and sat down by the bed. Shi Mingwan sat up straight, avoided his hand and moved herself a little to the side. "Why are you still here? Don't you have to work? You're sick." Her lifeless appearance yesterday scared him, so he asked Tang Hua to bring some urgent business matters here. "Who am I sick because of? Who did this to me?" Shi Mingwan's words were quite impolite. Jean Hausa revealed a rare trace of embarrassment. The reason why she was sick was indeed because of him. If he hadn't messed around in the bathroom, she wouldn't have gotten sick. Shi Mingwan looked at the expression on his face and thought that he was feeling guilty. She sneered and said, "I'm almost recovered. My mother is also here. There's nothing else for you to do. You can go." Jean Hausa didn't leave as she wished. "Auntie went to buy groceries and asked me to stay and take care of you." "Thank you, but it's okay." Shi Mingwan looked reluctant. "With you here, I won't be able to recover. If you really want me to be well, hurry up and leave. Auntie asked me to have lunch together." Shi Mingwan couldn't help but look at him. "Jean Hausa, what did you say to my mother? Tell me." Mother Sure actually asked him to stay for lunch? This revealed too much information. "Nothing. I just told your mother that I agreed to your conditions." Her conditions? What conditions? Shi Mingwan never thought that Zhang Haoze would agree to marry into her family, nor did she think that he would be willing to let his child have the surname Shi. Therefore, when she suddenly heard this sentence, she was confused. Your mother told me that if I want to be with you, I want to marry into your family, and I want the child to have the surname Shi. Shi Mingwan's mouth was wide open. She looked at Zhang Haoze and for a moment she thought that there was something wrong with her ears. Zhang Haoze, do you know what you're saying? I know. You want to marry into my family? Are you sure? Yes. It was just a surname, so Zhang Haoze didn't care. Moreover, that matter was too far away, so he didn't have the mood to think about it now. Shi Mingwan suddenly reached out and pulled the front of Zhang Haoze's shirt over. She didn't have much strength. If it weren't for Zhang Haoze's cooperation, she probably wouldn't have been able to pull him in front of her. She just stared at him, her gaze weak but sharp. Zhang Haoze, do you know what you're saying? Zhang Haoze went to pull her hand. You haven't recovered yet. Don't worry about these things for now. Rest well. Zhang Haoze, answer my question. Do you know what you're saying? You want to marry into my family? Yes. Does this mean that you want to marry me? Her eyes were filled with suspicion and mockery. She just looked at him like that, not believing what he said at all. Yes. 2 consecutive affirmative answers didn't soften Shi Mingwan's attitude at all. She looked at Zhang Haoze, and the expression on her face became sharper. What about Chen Feifei? If you want to marry me, what will she do? Zhang Haoze's expression didn't change. He seemed to dislike hearing Chen Feifei's name very much. Our matter has nothing to do with her, and you don't need to think about her. Don't need to think about Chen Feifei? And then? The entire Lin city knew that Zhang Haoze and Chen Feifei were engaged. Now that Zhang Haoze said that he wanted to marry her, wasn't he making her a third party who intervened in other people's relationships? Zhang Haoze, you don't understand at all. He might have some feelings for her and liked her, but he wouldn't understand her perspective, her thoughts, and her worries. I've said it before. You don't need to think about those things. Zhang Haoze, you're so selfish. Her words were sarcastic, but Zhang Haoze wasn't moved at all. He looked at the sharp side of her. It was rare for her to be like this. He didn't know if it was because Mother Shi came. The Shi Mingwan in front of him was much more confident. This was how people were. With someone to rely on, they would always be different. He reached out to pull Shi Mingwan's hand over and held it in his palm. He looked at her with a deep gaze. Wanwan, you can also be more selfish. He didn't like her to think about Chen Feifei, and he didn't like her to worry too much. It was enough for him to worry about those things. She didn't need to think about them at all. Just like Grandma Shi's words and actions, she could actually completely ignore them. She would only tire herself out by doing this. Shi Mingwan pulled her hand back and her face was cold. Zhang Haoze, I'm not you. There are some things that I will never be able to do, and I will never be as carefree as you. Wanwan, get out. Shi Mingwan refused to communicate with him anymore. She didn't want to look at him either. Wanwan. Zhang Haoze wanted to say something, but Mother Shi had already returned. When she left, she took the key from the porch, entered the door, and put the dishes in the kitchen. She planned to go to the room to see how Shi Mingwan was doing, but she realized that the atmosphere between the two of them didn't seem to be very good. Wanwan? Mother Shi looked at Shi Mingwan and then at Zhang Haoze. Her gaze wandered between the two of them. Seeing her mother return, Shi Mingwan didn't show any dissatisfaction on her face. Mom. She was about to get up, but Mother Shi quickly stopped her. You should continue to rest. I'll go cook. It's all your favorite food. You guys wait for a while. You can eat later. It was almost noon. Mother Shi was afraid that her daughter would starve, so she gave a few instructions and went into the kitchen. As soon as Mother Shi left, Shi Mingwan wanted to chase Zhang Haoze away. However, her phone rang at this moment. This time she didn't give Zhang Haoze a chance and went to pick up the phone herself. Zhang Haoze glanced at her, then got up and went outside. Mother Shi had just finished washing the rice when Zhang Haoze came in. He rolled up the sleeves of his shirt to his elbows. Annie, let me help you. No need. Mother Shi looked at Zhang Haoze and knew that he rarely entered the kitchen. I'm used to cooking. I don't need your help. You just need to accompany Wanwan. Zhang Haoze stood still. She's on the phone. You didn't coax her well, did you? Mother Shi took out the vegetables from the bag. Looking at Zhang Haoze's expression, she knew that the two of them definitely didn't come to an agreement just now. Haoze, haven't you told Wanwan about your family situation? Zhang Haoze was stunned for a moment. Mother Shi knew from his expression. You should have told Wanwan. Wan is a tough talker but soft-hearted child. If you told her about your family situation, she definitely wouldn't have messed with you. Mother sure didn't know the specific situation, but she could understand. There were also such families in their town. The father brought a stepmother into the family. The stepmother didn't treat the child of the ex-wife well. When the child grew up, he wouldn't even recognize the father, let alone recognize the mother. This was all human nature. It was understandable that she couldn't understand it at the moment. However, Shi Mengwan was a little stubborn. If he didn't explain it to her properly, she probably wouldn't understand. Zhang Haoze didn't respond, and Mother Shi didn't want his help. However, she asked him some questions. Other than your father, do you have any other relatives in your family? I don't have any relatives. Zhang Haoze's expression was indifferent. I don't have much contact with them. Mother Shi didn't ask any more. She could understand. If even her father didn't treat her well, she probably wouldn't have the energy to interact with other people. At this moment, Mother Shi's motherly love flared up. She looked at Zhang Haoze more and more affectionate. If you don't have any contact with them, then so be it. Pick a time another day and come home with Wan. We have many relatives at home. If you really get together with Wan in the future, you don't have to be so polite. We'll be your elders. Zhang Haoze pursed his lips slightly, and a rare look of emotion flashed across his deep eyes. Although Wan's grandmother is a little unreliable, she's actually not a bad person. Although Wan's two uncles and aunts have some ulterior motives, they are also good people. You'll know in the future. Grandma Shi had always been the one talking about the adoption. Actually, her two brothers-in-law didn't have any thoughts. After all, they all knew how good Father Shi was to Shi Mengwan and her sister. All right. This dish can be eaten after it's served. Go and call Wan to eat. Should we bring it in for her to eat? No need. Although she's sick, don't spoil her too much. How can she be so delicate? Let her get up and move around. She'll recover faster. Mother Shi had never been a person who doted on her children. When Zhang Haoze entered the room, Shi Mengwan had just ended the call with Su Qingsang. After Su Qingsang returned to Lin City, she had started working again. However, this time she brought her good news. She was pregnant. This was really good news for Shi Mengwan. She had already agreed to be the godmother of the child in Su Qingsang's stomach. When she heard that Su Qingsang was pregnant, she was extremely happy. The two of them had been married for more than a year, and now they had a child. They were even pregnant with twins. She was really happy for Su Qingsang from the bottom of her heart. She had never given birth, but Su Qingsang was an obstetrician and gynecologist. She didn't need her to teach her anything. However, it didn't affect the two women's excited discussion about the child. Especially when Su Qingsang talked about how the child came about. It was very strange. Hua Jinyao didn't seem to want children. This pregnancy was an accident. Su Qingsang originally thought that Hua Jinyao would want her to abort the child. However, she didn't expect Hua Jinyao to be very happy, even to the point of being silly. Through the phone, Shi Mengwan could feel the happiness that Su Qingsang revealed when she said that. She was very envious. After hanging up the phone, she couldn't help but think of Zhang Haoze. If she was pregnant, would dear brother be happy? Thinking of the situation between her and Zhang Haoze, she smiled bitterly. It wasn't the same thing at all. If she had a child, it would be really unfortunate. Just as she was thinking this, she looked up and saw Zhang Haoze enter the door. She especially didn't like him now. She turned her face away, not wanting to see him at all. It's time to eat. It wasn't that Zhang Haoze didn't see the expression on Shi Mengwan's face. His lips were pursed into a straight line and he looked a little gloomy. Shi Mengwan didn't give him a good look. She got out of bed, but as soon as her feet touched the ground, her body became a little weak. She rarely got sick, but she didn't know that this illness was because she had slept for too long, and her legs were a little weak. Zhang Haoze quickly stepped forward and hugged her. The moment his hands hugged her, Shi Mengwan instinctively wanted to struggle. Unfortunately, even if she was healthy, she wasn't a match for him, not to mention that she hadn't recovered from her illness yet. Zhang Haoze looked at her still pale little face, but he didn't intend to put her down. He just carried her and walked out. When Shi Mengwan realized what he was going to do, she struggled with all her might. She didn't want her mother to see her like this. Don't move. Zhang Haoze whispered in her ear, you don't want to fall either, do you? Shi Mengwan couldn't help but glare at him, but Zhang Haoze didn't seem to see her ugly expression. He wasn't afraid that Mother Shi was outside, so he directly carried her to the dining table outside. Mother Shi happened to come out with the soup and was about to put it on the dining table. She suddenly saw her daughter being carried out by Jean Hausa, and the smile on her face became a little playful. Especially when she saw Shi Mengwan staring at Jean Hausa with deep love. She even said, "You're too much. Don't you have legs? Come down and eat. Put me down." Shi Mengwan glared at Jean Hausa again, and Jean Hausa obediently placed her on the dining chair. Mother Shi now felt that Jean Hausa wasn't bad. With his height and physical strength. What was the saying on the internet now? Yes, boyfriend strength. Not bad, not bad. The smile on her face became even brighter. Shi Mengwan knew what Mother Shi was thinking when she saw her expression, and she was angry again. She couldn't help but glare at Jean Hausa again. Mother Shi looked at Jean Hausa and her gaze was different now. "Hausa, sit down and eat too." "Thank you, Auntie." Jean Hausa sat down next to Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan glanced at him, then got up and moved the chair to the side. Seeing this, Jean Hausa moved the chair in her direction. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth and was about to move the chair again. One. Mother Shi couldn't take it anymore. "You're not honest even when you're eating. Do you want me to help you move the chair outside the door?" Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth and glanced at Mother Shi. "Mom, what do you know?" She had a lot to say, but Mother Shi didn't give her a chance. "What's wrong with Hausa?" "I think Hausa is very good. You really have to change your temper." Shi Mengwan's eyes widened. "What's wrong with my temper?" "Stubborn." Mother Shi unceremoniously criticized her daughter, but when she faced Jean Hausa, her face was smiling like a flower. "Hausa, Wanwan has been spoiled rotten by her father and me. You have to be more tolerant." As she spoke, she scooped a bowl of soup and placed it in front of Jean Hausa. Shi Mengwan saw this and was very angry. She couldn't help but reach out and bring the bowl of soup over. "You child." Mother Shi looked at Shi Mengwan and felt that her daughter was a little too much. "It's okay, Auntie." Jean Hausa was quite magnanimous. The more he was like this, the more Mother Shi felt that her daughter was immature. She scooped another bowl of soup and placed it in front of Jean Hausa. Shi Mengwan resisted the urge to knock the soup away. "Mom, doesn't he have his own hands? Let him scoop it himself." "You child, didn't I help you scoop soup at home? You don't have hands either?" "I'm your daughter. He's my son-in-law." The bowl in Shi Mengwan's hand almost fell down. She looked at Mother Shi and felt a headache coming on. "Mom, what nonsense are you talking about?" "How am I talking nonsense?" Mother Shi glanced at Jean Hausa. "Hausa has already agreed to marry into the family. How am I talking nonsense?" "He's lying to you." Shi Mengwan was furious. She couldn't help but glare at Jean Hausa fiercely. It was all this guy's fault for spouting nonsense in front of her mother. "Mom, don't believe him." "I don't believe him." "Believe you? I think Hausa is pretty good. I think you really have to change your temper. Otherwise, I won't be able to stand you in the future, let alone Hausa." "Mom, am I still your daughter? Why do you always side with outsiders?" "If he becomes my son-in-law, then he won't be an outsider." Mother Shi's expression was matter of fact. Shi Mengwan was furious. She watched as Jean Hausa picked up the bowl in his hand and calmly drank the soup. She couldn't help but feel angry. Without thinking, she snatched the bowl from his hand and placed it on the table. She glared at Jean Hausa fiercely, not caring about Mother Shi's presence at all. "Jean Hausa, leave. Go find your fiancé. Don't lie to my mom here." Even if she would shed all pretenses and make Mother Shi unhappy, she couldn't take it anymore. She had no scruples. As soon as she said this, Mother Shi's expression changed. Her gaze was sharp for a moment, and then she looked at Jean Hausa inquiringly. Chapter 688. Fiancé? What fiancé? The expression on Mother Shi's face changed completely. She looked at Shi Mengwan and finally realized that her daughter did have a temper, but she was definitely not someone who would cause trouble for no reason. "Hausa? What fiancé?" Jean Hausa looked at Shi Mengwan as if he didn't expect her to talk about such a topic in front of Mother Shi. The corners of Shi Mengwan's lips curled up, and her eyes were filled with disdain. She looked at Jean Hausa fixedly. She wanted to know how he would explain it in front of her mother. "Mr. Jean?" Mother Shi saw that Jean Hausa hadn't spoken, so the way she addressed him changed. Jean Hausa glanced at Shi Mengwan and turned to face Mother Shi with a calm expression. "I do have a fiancée, but I don't have any feelings for her. And I promised Wanwan that I would resolve this matter." "So you really have a fiancé?" Mother Shi only paid attention to the first sentence. "Auntie, I said I would resolve it. Mr. Jean, please." Mother Shi's face darkened. She looked at Jean Hausa impolitely and pointed in the direction of the door. Mr. Jean, our small family can't afford to be associated with Mr. Jean. Auntie, I promised Wan that I would definitely resolve this matter. Jean Hausa was rarely patient, but Mother sure didn't want to listen. Then we'll talk about it after you resolve it. The atmosphere was a little awkward and stiff. Jean Hausa's expression was a little awkward. He had never been good at explaining, but because the other party was Shi Mingwan's mother and an elder, his attitude was quite polite. Auntie, I just need some time to resolve it. This isn't a big deal. Shi Mingwan looked at him and didn't speak. Not a big deal? Why would she want a man who couldn't be with her openly? Mother Shi looked at him impolitely and didn't accept this explanation. Not a big deal? I wonder what Mr. Jean's definition of a big deal is? You think having a fiancé isn't a big deal, but if our Wan has a fiancé at home, I wonder if Mr. Jean also thinks it's not a big deal? She countered Jean Hausa, and Jean Hausa's expression became more and more uncomfortable. Auntie, please. Mother Shi's expression was already very ugly. It was true that she liked Jean Hausa before, but that was based on the fact that Jean Hausa had a clean background and no messy relationships around him. Jean Hausa had a fiancé. In Mother Shi's eyes, no matter how good he wasn't a good man. He couldn't be entrusted with her life. The atmosphere in the dining room was very awkward. Mother Shi and Shi Mingwan didn't look too good. Shi Mingwan sat there, and the corners of her lips curled into a mocking smile. She didn't go to see Jean Hausa. With Mother Shi's help, she had nothing to do. She even leisurely picked up the soup in front of her and took a sip. Freshly made sanxian soup, light and delicious, tastes really good. Mom, this soup is really delicious. She looked at Mother Shi with a faint smile on her face. That silent intimacy caused Jean Hausa's eyes to darken. If you like it, drink more. Mother Shi glanced at Jean Hausa as she spoke. Mr. Jean, if there's nothing else, you can leave first. Wan and I still want to eat. It's inconvenient for you to be here. Jean Hausa took a deep look at Shi Mingwan and finally stood up. He stood in front of the dining table. His tall figure made him look imposing as soon as he stood up. Mother Shi didn't give in, and Shi Mingwan still drank the soup leisurely. After drinking this soup, she felt much better. Her heartless appearance made Jean Hausa's expression turn a little ugly. He pulled out the chair and took a step back. Auntie, please give me some time. I will solve my problem. Mother Shi was unmoved. In her heart, nothing could compare to her son's happiness. Jean Hausa looked at Shi Mingwan again. She had already finished the soup in the bowl and handed the bowl to Mother Shi. The corners of her lips curled up into an extremely bright smile. Mom, get me another bowl of soup. Don't drink the soup. Drink it later. Eat first. As Mother Shi spoke, she scooped a bowl of rice for Shi Mingwan and placed it in her hand. Jean Hausa saw that she wasn't looking at him at all, and his expression was very ugly. Auntie Wan, I'll be leaving first. No one paid attention to him. Ever since Jean Hausa became famous as a young man, he had never encountered such a thing. However, Mother Shi and Shi Mingwan acted as if they didn't see him and continued to eat. Jean Hausa turned around and was about to leave. Wait. When Jean Hausa reached the door, Shi Mingwan suddenly called out to him. This time, both Mother Shi and Jean Hausa looked at her. They didn't understand what she was doing. Especially Mother Shi. Her face was full of worry. Could this child be regretting it? Jean Hausa. Leave the key to my house. After Shi Mingwan said this, she lowered her head and went to eat. Mother Shi seemed to have suddenly thought of this problem. She stared at Jean Hausa and waited for him to hand over the key. Jean Hausa stood at the door. This was the first time in his life that he had experienced such a predicament. He took a deep look at Shi Mingwan, then took out the key to Shi Mingwan's house and placed it at the entrance. He opened the door and walked straight out. The door opened and closed. Shi Mingwan's heart had been hanging in her throat, but now she finally relaxed. Mother Shi sat down and looked at Shi Mingwan with a hint of heartache in her eyes. Wan. Mom, eat. Shi Mingwan knew what Mother Shi wanted to say without guessing, but she didn't want to hear it now. Wan, how could Mother Shi eat? She only felt that her daughter's life was bitter. Did you know that Jean Hausa had a fiancé? Shi Mingwan lowered her head and didn't answer Mother Shi's question. However, this attitude was undoubtedly a tacit agreement. Daughter, why are you so stupid? You, Mom? Shi Mingwan's eyes were a little sore, and her heart was also uncomfortable. She forced herself to ignore it. It's all in the past. He's gone now, isn't he? This person had left, but the impact was still there. When Mother Shi thought of the impact Shi Mingwan had caused because of the other party, she felt even more uncomfortable. This John Hausa looks like a decent person. Why would he do something like having an affair? Sure Mingwan didn't answer her, and Mother sure didn't need her to answer either. She said to herself, that's true. You can know a person's face but not his heart. There are some people in this world who really can't see through it. She looked at Sure Mingwan worriedly and sighed in her heart. Wanwan, why do you think your life is so bitter? Mom? Sure Mingwan stopped eating for a moment. She looked at Mother Sure. Can you stop talking? It's all in the past. Yes, it's all in the past. Mother Sure stopped talking. In the future, stay away from that John guy. I know. It's not that I'm stopping you, but no matter how good this man is, he's still someone else's. Mom, I told you I know. In the future, I'll find a better one. We'll talk about it later. How could she be in the mood to look for another one now? That Xiao Qi. Mom, can you not mention him? If Sure Mingwan was interested in Xiao Qi, the two of them would have been together a long time ago. She just didn't mean that. Mother Sure let out a long sigh. Seeing her like this, Sure Mingwan put down the bowl in her hand, picked up the bowl, and placed a bowl of soup in front of her. All right, let's eat. Seeing that Mother Sure still didn't seem to be happy, she said nonchalantly, Mom, don't worry. Your daughter is loved by everyone. Flowers bloom when they see flowers. Someone will definitely want her. Seeing her like this, Mother Sure could only let it go no matter how worried she was. Sure Mingwan lowered her eyes and focused on eating. She didn't respond to Mother Sure's words. Tang Hua looked at John Hausa. Even if he didn't say anything, he could tell that John Hausa was in a very bad mood. Boss, how's the cooperation case with Tianji? It's almost done. We're just waiting to sign the contract. Confirm this matter again later. Sign the contract in these 2 days. Yes. In silence, John Hausa looked out of the window. No one knew what he was thinking. Tang Hua felt a chill on the back of his neck. Boss's mood really wasn't right? It couldn't be because of that person, right? Is there any movement over there? The old man's health seems to be getting worse. I heard that he called a lawyer again 2 days ago. Call a lawyer? John Hausa narrowed his eyes as if he had thought of something. He sneered. Make the arrangements. I'll make a trip to Qing City. Okay. I'll make the arrangements now. Tang Hua had just opened the office door when he saw Qin Feifei standing at the door. His expression was a little strange. Miss Qin. This shout was especially loud, causing Qin Feifei to glare at him. What are you shouting for? You're so surprised. I don't know why Brother Hao left someone like you by his side. Tang Hua rubbed his nose and turned to look at John Hausa. John Hausa gave him a look and he quickly left. After he left, John Hausa picked up the document beside him and started reading. Qin Feifei bit her lip and walked in quickly. Brother Hao, what have you been busy with these 2 days? You haven't been in the company for 3 days. I have something to do. What's more important than the company's matters? Qin Feifei was wearing a decent professional suit and holding a document in her hand. John Hausa looked up at her. What's the matter? Of course there's something. Qin Feifei's attention was successfully diverted by John Hausa. She waved the folder in her hand. Brother Hao, I also want to contribute to the company. This is a proposal that I spent a few days making. Take a look. John Hausa wasn't in a hurry to take the document. He looked at Qin Feifei with a solemn and somewhat gloomy expression. Biffit. Yes. You don't have to work so hard. John Hausa was serious. You can stay at home and enjoy your days as the eldest daughter of the Chen family. Qin Feifei looked at John Hausa blankly, as if she didn't quite understand what he meant. But I want to enter the company. I want to help you. There's no need. John Hausa said directly, Feifei, don't waste all your time on me. You should go live your own life. Chapter 689. It means that you should live your own life. Your own life. John Hausa explained again in a rare good temper. Qin Feifei understood, but she would rather not understand. Brother Hao, what do you mean? What do you mean by my own life? This is the kind of life I want. No. John Hausa looked at her calmly. I mean, you can contact more members of the opposite sex, fall in love, and enjoy the process of falling in love. Qin Feifei looked at him in a daze. It took her some time to understand what John Hausa meant. Her eyes were filled with shock. After she reacted, her emotions began to lose control. Brother Hao, what do you mean? I'm your fiancé. You want me to find another man? Feifei, you know that I only have sibling feelings for you. Brother Hao. Qin Feifei interrupted him. Don't say any more. I don't want to hear it. Feifei, Brother Hao, I don't want to fall in love with another man. I like you, I love you. I don't want anyone else. I just want you. But I don't love you. In the past, Jean Hausa was worried about Qin Feifei's body, so he had never said it to her so straightforwardly. He was only hinting. Now he didn't want to continue. Qin Feifei's face turned pale. She looked at Jean Hausa and didn't accept what he said at all. Brother Hao, I know you don't love me, but now you don't even give me a chance to love you? Is that so? Jean Hausa's cold face softened because of Qin Feifei's expression. Feifei, you're still young. You don't quite understand what love is. Why don't I understand? Qin Feifei shook her head and refused to accept what Jean Hausa said. I only know that I like you. I've always liked you. I didn't know anything in the past. I stayed at home every day waiting for you to come back and accompany me. But now I've changed. Look, I like you. I go to work every day. I work very hard. My dad praised me last time. Brother Hao, I can do anything, but I can't live without you. Don't do this to me. Her heart palpitations were acting up again. She covered her heart with one hand and looked at Jean Hausa with a pained expression. Brother Hao, I really can do anything as long as you don't abandon me. Feifei. After all, she was the girl he had watched grow up. Jean Hausa's expression was cold, but not as cold as before. You don't have to be like this. I really don't love you. Because you don't love me, you've deprived me of my right to love you, right? There were tears in Qin Feifei's eyes. Because of her illness, her face was very pale, and she looked quite weak and uncomfortable. However, Jean Hausa was not moved at all. Feifei, you need to live your own life. She would not have him in her life. These days, Qin Feifei had been thinking about doing her job well and making Jean Hausa look at her in a new light. But she didn't expect Jean Hausa to be so heartless. Brother Hao. Qin Feifei stepped forward, wanting to grab Jean Hausa's hand. Jean Hausa avoided it and her face became paler. Brother Hao, do you hate me so much now? What did I do wrong? Jean Hausa didn't answer her question. Feifei, I probably have to go out tomorrow. You can also take this opportunity to think about what I said. He had said everything he could. As for how to get over it, it was her own business. Just as he was about to call Tang Hualai to send her back, Qin Feifei's body went limp and she actually fainted in his arms. Feifei. When she fell to the ground, Jean Hausa had no choice but to reach out to support her. He carried her in his arms and hurried out of the room. An hour later, Qin Yongchang, who had rushed over after hearing the news, looked at his unconscious daughter on the hospital bed. His gaze at Jean Hausa was unusually gloomy. Hausa, is this how you treat Feifei? Jean Hausa was silent. His appearance made Qin Yongchang even angrier. Tell me, how have I treated you all these years? Not to mention that I've been wholeheartedly nurturing you all these years, just take it as me saving you back then and preventing you from dying on the streets. You should think about thanking me, right? I don't want you to keep talking about our family's kindness to you every day. But no matter what, you know how good Feifei has been to you all these years. If you treat her like this now, will you be able to face Feifei? Jean Hausa pursed his lips into a straight line. No matter what Qin Yongchang said, he just didn't say anything. Qin Yongchang was furious. He pointed at him and said, You. Okay. So I've raised an ingrate all these years? Jean Hausa, you're not being kind like this. Jean Hausa stood there and let Qin Yongchang's hand almost poke the tip of his nose. From time to time, doctors and nurses passed by in the corridor. Qin Yongchang retracted his hand hatefully. Hausa, you can't be heartless. Uncle. Jean Hausa finally spoke. You should have seen everything I've done for the Qin family over the years. The Qin family has done me a favor. I know that I've been repaying the favor all these years. But there are some things that you know that you can't force. I only have sibling love for Feifei, not love between a man and a woman. If Feifei really is with me, she won't be happy. You're saying this now? Then why did you agree to be engaged to Feifei back then? Jean Hausa's expression didn't change, but there was a flash of mockery in his eyes. Do you still need me to tell you what happened during that engagement? Qin Yongchang couldn't keep his face straight, so he could only bring up the favor again. Anyway, the Qin family has done you a favor and Feifei has also done you a favor. You can't do something like burning the bridge after crossing the river. As he spoke, he grabbed Jean Hausa's arm. Don't forget. If Feifei hadn't insisted on saving you back then, you would have been buried on some mountain by now. I won't ask for anything else from you. Anyway, you have to be responsible for Feifei. Jean Hausa looked at Qin Yongchang's hand, and his eyes were slightly cold. Under that gaze, even Qin Yongchang, who had lived more than 20 years longer than him, had no choice but to retract his hand. The doctor happened to come out at this moment to tell them that Qin Feifei had woken up. The two of them entered the ward together. Qin Feifei's face was pale, and her entire body was like a destroyed little white flower. When she saw Zhang Haoze, her eyes turned red again, and she looked like she wanted to say something but she hesitated. Qin Yongchang's heart ached for his daughter. He glared at Zhang Haoze hatefully and took a few steps forward. Feifei, how are you? Dad, I'm fine. Qin Feifei's voice was weak, which made Qin Yongchang's heart ache. She just stared at Zhang Haoze. Brother Hao, can we say a few words? Zhang Haoze didn't say anything, but his expression became more serious than before. Qin Feifei bit her lip and pleaded, Brother Hao, you don't even want to say a few words to me now? Qin Yongchang glared at Zhang Haoze again. Feifei, Dad will wait for you for a while. I still have something to talk to you about. He went out, and only Qin Feifei and Zhang Haoze were left in the ward. Brother Hao, Feifei. Zhang Haoze looked at her. I'm going to Qing City tomorrow. I won't be back for a while. Brother Hao. Qin Feifei was anxious. She wanted to get out of bed, but Zhang Haoze stopped her. During this period of time, you can think about what you want. What I want is you. You've always been the only one. You're still too young. Zhang Haoze shook his head. Your dad is very worried about you. Take good care of yourself and don't do anything that will make him more worried. After saying this, Zhang Haoze didn't look at Qin Feifei anymore. He turned around and left the ward. Qin Feifei wanted to get out of bed and chase after him, but Qin Yongchang had already come in and stopped her. Zhang Haoze didn't see any of this, but at this time even if he saw it he wouldn't care. When he left the hospital, Tang Hua had been guarding him. When he saw him come out, he immediately went forward to open the car door for him. After he got into the car, Tang Hua signaled the driver to drive. He looked at him worriedly. Boss, how's Qin Feifei? Zhang Haoze didn't say anything. Tang Hua raised his eyebrows, and there was a hint of gossip on his face. Qin Yongchang, that old fox, won't use kindness to ask you to repay it again, right? Seeing that Zhang Haoze didn't say anything, Tang Hua snorted. That old fox. Does he really think that you don't know what he did later? Zhang Haoze didn't respond. Seeing that he wasn't angry, Tang Hua couldn't help but say a few more words. Speaking of which, the economic crisis of the Qin family almost caused the entire Qin family to go bankrupt. If it weren't for your help, how could the Qin family still have any glory now? Not to mention their current status in Lin City, if it weren't for you supporting the entire Qin family that year, I'm afraid that the father and daughter would have lived a hard life long ago. How could they still have the face to talk to you about kindness? This old fox is really thick-skinned. Feeling Zhang Haoze's gaze on him, Tang Hua didn't back down. That's true. That little kindness has long been repaid. That is you. Zhang Haoze's gaze became sharper and sharper, and Tang Hua didn't say anything else. Boss, don't glare at me. I'm just feeling wronged for you. Zhang Haoze continued to be silent. It didn't matter if he felt wronged or not. It was a fact that Qin Feifei and Qin Yongchang had saved him. This was undeniable. It was understandable that Qin Yongchang wanted to repay them. However, it was up to him whether he agreed to repay them in his own way. Because of Mother Shi's arrival, Shi Mingwan felt much better. Other than the mention of Zhang Haoze during breakfast, the two of them didn't talk about him anymore. Shi Mingwan recovered very quickly. She felt almost better the next day. As soon as she recovered, she wanted to go to work, but Mother Shi wouldn't let her. The studio is your own anyway. Your body is also your own. You can work at any time, but if your body collapses you won't be able to. Because Mother Shi was around, Shi Mingwan couldn't go to work, so she could only agree to rest at home for another day. Mother Shi was very happy to receive her daughter's affirmation. She picked up her bag and went out to buy groceries. Just as Mother Shi left, the doorbell rang. Shi Mingwan happened to see Mother Shi's phone on the coffee table. She thought it was Mother Shi who had returned to take her phone, so she went to open the door without thinking too much. When the door opened and she saw Zhang Haoze standing outside, Shi Mingwan closed the door without thinking. Zhang Haoze stretched out his long legs and directly blocked her from closing the door. The door couldn't be closed, so he took this opportunity to flash in. Zhang Haoze? In the next second she hugged Zhang Haoze. Shi Mingwan instinctively wanted to struggle. Don't move. Zhang Haoze pressed his chin against her neck. Let me hug you. Shi Mingwan's body was very stiff. She was hugged tightly by Zhang Haoze. She couldn't even move. However, she had never seen Zhang Haoze like this before. She was a little dazed. She subconsciously moved her body. Zhang Haoze let go of her at this moment. He took a few steps back and his gaze fell on Shi Mingwan's face. He looked at her greedily. Have you recovered from your illness? Yes. Shi Mingwan's expression didn't change. Zhan Haoze nodded. I need to go out. This time it might take a long time. It has nothing to do with me, Shi Mingwan answered without thinking. After saying that, she saw Zhan Haoze's gloomy face. It was too late to change her mind. Moreover, she didn't think she was wrong. Zhan Haoze, you're not anyone to me. You really don't need to report your whereabouts to me. She said that, but Zhan Haoze looked at her deeply. I've already made it clear to Qin Feifei. Really? Did it have anything to do with her? He had made it clear to Qin Feifei, but what was the result? Did they break off the engagement? If not, what was the use of him saying all this today? Zhan Haoze's brows twitched slightly. He looked at Shi Mingwan with a rare gentleness. Wan, are you willing to give me some time? He couldn't tell her how much time he needed. After all, there was still a lot of trouble in Qing City. It wasn't something that could be resolved in a day or two. He should have endured it and waited for the trouble to be resolved before looking for her, but he couldn't bear to. I'm not willing. Shi Mingwan's words were even more heartless than before. Zhan Haoze's eyes darkened. Wan, you should go. Otherwise my mother will be back later. Zhan Haoze stood still, but Shi Mingwan went forward and opened the door. He looked like he couldn't wait for her to leave. Zhan Haoze's expression was very ugly. He looked at Shi Mingwan with a very complicated gaze. Shi Mingwan acted as if she didn't see it. Instead, she opened the door a little more. Wan. Shi Mingwan turned her face away. She didn't look at him at all, nor did she listen to his explanation. Zhan Haoze was helpless. He looked at the time and was about to board the plane. He couldn't help but look at Shi Mingwan again, but she still didn't look at him. He could only turn around and leave. When he left, his shoulders drooped, and his entire body revealed a great sense of powerlessness. Shi Mingwan's action of closing the door stiffened for a moment. After Zhan Haoze walked out, he stopped again. Shi Mingwan didn't want to continue watching, so she closed the door with a bang. After the door closed, she leaned against the door. She told herself that all of this was Zhan Haoze acting. It was all fake. She couldn't be soft-hearted and she couldn't be soft-hearted. That was it. However, she couldn't forget Zhan Haoze's disappointed back view before he left. And the words he kept telling her to give him time. The plane slowly landed at Qing City Airport. Zhan Haoze came out of the airport and got into the car waiting outside. His expression wasn't good. In fact, he had been gloomy ever since he came out of Shi Mingwan's house. Tang Hua didn't even dare to speak. Now that he had arrived at Qing City, he had no choice but to speak. Boss, there's news from my hometown. What news? The old man has brought Zhan Yi into the ancestral house these few days. Zhan Yi? He hadn't heard of this person before. Yes. As Tang Hua spoke, he took out a document and placed it in Zhan Haoze's hand. This has all of Zhan Yi's information. Take a look first. Zhan Haoze took the document and flipped through it. At this moment, the car drove towards Zhan Haoze's residence in Qing City, Cherry Blossom Manor. The Zhan family was the #1 family in Qing City. The head of the Zhan family, Zhan Kuan, had always been the pillar of the entire Zhan family. In the past few years, Zhan Kuan's health had been getting worse and worse. He, who was gradually getting old, began to delegate some of the power in his hands to his son, Zhan Lai. Zhan Lai wasn't Zhan Kuan's only son. The Zhan family had power and influence. When Zhan Kuan was young, he was quite unrestrained when it came to women. Other than Zhan Lai, he also had several illegitimate daughters and illegitimate children. But those children weren't Zhan Lai. Some of them didn't even have the right to enter the Zhan family. This wasn't because Zhan Lai was outstanding, but because Zhan Lai was born from Zhan Kuan's only wife. He was the legitimate son and also the eldest son. He was also the product of the combination of power. Zhan Kuan made his fortune by taking the side path. After his business grew bigger and bigger, he knew that a tall tree would attract the wind. In order to protect the Zhan family's secret business, he married the daughter of a high-ranking official in the province where Qing City was located at that time. In the first few years of the strong marriage, he treated his wife with some respect. Although he played outside, he didn't have any illegitimate children. But later, Zhan Lai's biological mother gave birth to Zhan Lai and had a son, so he didn't care anymore. He could play however he wanted outside. More importantly, Zhan Lai's mother died when she gave birth to him. Zhan Lai was born without a mother. Zhan Kuan was young at that time, and Zhan Lai's grandfather knew that such a daughter couldn't keep her virginity for her daughter. Therefore, after communicating with each other, they made 2 rules. First, Jean Lai couldn't call another woman mother, which meant that Jean Kuan could forget about marrying again in this lifetime. Secondly, everything in the Jean family in the future must belong to Jean Lai. There were only these two and the rest was up to Jean Kuan to do. Jean Kuan had nothing to disagree with, even if he didn't want to agree in that kind of situation at that time. The Jean family's business really needed to be taken care of by the external family. Therefore, Jean Kuan was quite concerned about his son, Jean Lai. On one hand, he took good care of him. Second, he was also groomed as a successor. However, as Jean Lai grew up, he began to have his own ideas. Jean Kuan realized that this son of his was different from him. Jean Kuan liked women and power. He seemed affectionate, but he was actually heartless. What about Jean Lai? He had never liked women since he was young. Until he reached puberty, he would avoid women as much as possible. For a long time, Jean Kuan thought that his son was sick. When Jean Lai was 18 years old, he even specially prepared 2 women and sent them to Jean Lai's bed. Unfortunately, Jean Lai didn't touch those 2 women at all. Instead, he seemed to be frightened and didn't go home for a few days. Jean Kuan was angry. Later, he asked a psychiatrist and repeatedly confirmed that Jean Lai only didn't like the woman he chose, and not because Jean Lai didn't like women. That was why he stopped all actions of sending women to Jean Lai. However, it was precisely this Jean Lai who didn't like women. However, not long after he graduated from university, he took a fancy to a woman from a commoner background. It didn't matter if he took a fancy to her. He just wanted to play with her. Jean Kuan would never control his son in these matters. But look at his son. Not only did he insist on being with this commoner woman, he also decided to marry her. This was something that Jean Kuan absolutely couldn't tolerate. He chose Jean Lai as his successor and groomed Jean Lai according to the method of a successor. He had to let him follow the path that he had arranged for him. He tried his best to stop Jean Lai from being with that commoner woman, and then gave that commoner woman a sum of money. He wanted that woman to leave his son. However, he didn't expect that commoner woman to be so scheming. After taking his money, she showed the check to Jean Lai. When Jean Lai saw the check, he had a big fight with him. Once again, he showed his determination to be with that woman. Of course, this wasn't something that Jean Kuan could tolerate. He didn't raise Jean Lai to let him disobey him. He asked people to keep an eye on Jean Lai and not let him see that woman. He asked people to send that woman away far away. But he didn't expect that his good son. In order to be with that woman, he took advantage of the fact that he was busy with his family's business to look for that woman. When he was young, Jean Lai wasn't fully fledged, so of course he didn't have that much ability. But even if he couldn't get married, he still had an external family. Jean Lai's grandfather came out to help Jean Lai at this moment. Not only did he successfully find that woman, but the two of them even eloped. This was simply a provocation to Jean Kuan's authority. How could he tolerate such a thing happening? He used the name of the Jean family to set up a bounty. Both the black and white forces received the bounty. However, with Jean Lai's external family opposing him, he couldn't find Jean Lai and that woman for a long time. It wasn't until later that someone finally told him the news of Jean Lai and that woman. Jean Kuan hid from the world. The spies of the external family brought people and personally went to look for them. However, he found out that not only did Jean Lai and that woman not break up, they even had a child. Seeing that Jean Lai even had a child, this didn't make Jean Kuan calm down. It only made him even angrier. Especially when Jean Kuan saw his son, the outstanding son that he had single-handedly raised. The son who wanted to let the other party inherit the entire Jean family business. Just like an ordinary man, he accompanied a woman to go shopping and buy groceries. He looked at his son and actually smiled like an idiot. Holding a child in his arms, he smiled like a fool. He even saw his son changing the diapers of a child. When his son had already become a mediocre, tacky man. Jean Kuan couldn't control his emotions at all. To hell with any agreement. Such a son. He didn't want it. But after calming down, he began to vent his anger. The person who made his son become like this was that woman. If it weren't for that woman, his son wouldn't have become such a mediocre man. Chapter 690. The atmosphere in the carriage was very quiet. It had been a long time since Jean Hausa finished reading the information. There was no reaction. Tang Hua couldn't help but be a little worried. Boss? Jean Hausa withdrew his thoughts from the past. Looking at the information in his hand, his face was a little gloomy. His gaze fell on Zhang Yi's photo and he sneered. If Zhang Yi comes back, won't Zhang Li and Zhang Yang be unable to sit still? His lips curled into a mocking smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Tang Hua nodded. Zhan Li and Zhan Yang were transferred abroad by the old master. They won't be able to come back for the time being. At this point, Tang Hua's expression suddenly changed. I received news that Zhan Yi seems to have contacted the people in the sky. I think he's just trying to get Tianji's order and use it as a stepping stone to his family. Zhan Hao's gaze became more and more sinister. His gaze was gloomy as if he had thought of something. Zhan Yi, don't think about the list in the sky. However, I can give him another big gift. Tang Hua looked at Zhan Haoze. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the street view of Qing City outside the window. No matter what, Zhan Li and Zhan Yang are part of the Zhan family. Since the old man wants Zhan Yi to go home, then they have to come back and send a congratulatory gift, right? Tang Hua understood and nodded. That's right. This gift can't be light. That's right. Since Zhan Li and Zhan Yang have sent a great gift, I, as their elder brother, naturally have to send a great gift as well. Boss. Tang Hua immediately reacted. Sixth brother is waiting. It's fine. Tell old 6 and old 7 to prepare. When does Zhan Yi come home? That's when we make our move. Don't worry. Zhan Kun lay on the hospital bed and listened to Uncle Chi's reply. He didn't look too well. Ever since he was struck by the wind, his body had not been in good shape. Even if he went out, he had to use a wheelchair. He had to gasp for air just to say a single sentence. More importantly, he couldn't move half of his body. For Zhan Kun, who had once been all-powerful, this was truly more uncomfortable than death. Zhan Yi is back? He's here. Uncle Chi was the butler of the Zhan Manor. He was also one of Zhan Kun's most trusted subordinates. He had followed Zhan Kun for many years. Let him come up. Zhan Yi came up. He looked somewhat similar to Zhan Kun. It could even be said that he was the most similar to Zhan Kun in the third generation. However, this resemblance was only in appearance. The thing you said last time, how is it? Because of the wind, Zhan Kun's voice was very slow. His voice was hoarse and it sounded unpleasant no matter how one listened to it. Grandpa, I'm sorry. I didn't manage to get Skyline's deal. At this point, Zhan Yi was still a little unwilling. He knew that this was an opportunity for him. However, the current situation had exceeded his expectations. Zhan Kun narrowed his eyes with some dissatisfaction. The Zhan family was a big business, so he didn't put it in his eyes. But he was the one who called Zhan Yi back. If Zhan Yi couldn't come up with some good results, how could he convince the public? Not to mention that he was powerless now. He was old and could no longer support the Zhan family. Originally, Zhan Lai was the heir of the Zhan family, and Zhan Kun had high hopes for him. However, Zhan Lai's two sons, Zhan Yang and Zhan Li, weren't very successful. One had mediocre aptitude, so it was difficult for him to take on such a big responsibility. The other had some ability, but he was arrogant, complacent, and self-righteous. In Zhan Kun's eyes, neither of these two grandsons were qualified successors. Other than Zhan Lai, he didn't know how many illegitimate children he had outside. But at present, there were only a few who could be registered in Qing City. One was Zhan Ji, Zhan Yi's father. The other was Zhan Quan. He gave birth to Zhan Cheng and Zhan Shi. Compared to Zhan Yang and Zhan Li, Zhan Cheng and Zhan Shi were even more mediocre. Zhan Kun didn't like these grandsons. However, there was no one he could use at this time. Not to mention that none of the grandsons in the third generation could catch his eye. Even Zhan Lai and Zhan Kun were very dissatisfied. And he couldn't even say these dissatisfactions. Those secrets of the Zhan family made him unable to give up on Zhan Lai, his son. Even if he was just putting on a show, he had no choice but to hand over some power to Zhan Lai. Not to mention that he was unwilling to hand over these power to Zhan Lai. Zhan Lai wasn't young anymore. He was already in his 50s. No matter how capable he was, his energy couldn't be compared to that of a young person. The Zhan family needed new blood. But among the 5 grandsons, none of them were to his liking. Previously, he had revealed some intentions to let Zhan Yi think that he could enter the Zhan family and obtain the Zhan family's power. But he didn't expect that this Zhan Yi was also a useless person. Stupid? He wanted to scold him for being an idiot, but now was the time to use Zhan Yi. Zhan Kun thought of this and became more and more angry. Zhan Yi was a rare smart person in the third generation of the Zhan family. How could he not know what Zhan Kun wanted to scold? Perhaps he had thought of something. Zhan Yi suddenly raised his head. Grandfather, don't you want to know who the person who intercepted the order from Tianji and made me return empty-handed was and waste these few months? Zhan Kun looked at him, and a bad premonition flashed in his old and turbid eyes. What do you want to say? The person who obtained the order from Tianji is Zhan Haoze. Zhan Yi said word by word, even if he couldn't get anything good. He had to drag someone down with him. Jean Kuen's face suddenly turned red, and he started coughing violently. Uncle Chi was behind him, quickly supporting his body and patting him on the back. However, it was useless. Jean Kuen was still coughing violently. He glared at Jean-Yi, almost wanting to stare a hole in his body. What did you say? His voice was hoarse and his eyes were bloodshot. Jean-Yi had never been close to this grandfather. Seeing Jean Kuen like this, he was a little scared. I said, the person who obtained the order from Tianji is Jean Hausa. Jean Kuen coughed again. This time he coughed even more violently than before. The order from Tianji wasn't much. Although the profits it brought were considerable, it wasn't necessary for the Jean family. However, the person who obtained the order from Tianji shouldn't be Jean Hausa. Anyone could do it, but it couldn't be Jean Hausa, that be ****. Grandfather, Jean-Yi still wanted to say something more. Jean Kuen grabbed the water cup by the bedside and threw it at Jean-Yi. Although he was old, the temper of his youth was still there. This throw almost hit Jean-Yi's head. If he hadn't dodged quickly, his face would have been disfigured. Grandfather, since you're fine, I'll go out first. After saying that, Jean-Yi turned around and left. His footsteps seemed to be chased by a ghost. When Jean Kuen saw this, he coughed violently again. No matter how Uncle Chi comforted him, it was useless. It wasn't easy for him to calm down, but Jean Kuen's expression was still terrifyingly gloomy. He's indeed a B****. I should have killed him back then. I should have killed him. It was obvious that it took a lot of effort to speak, but he still said 2 sentences in a row. It could be seen how angry Jean Kuen was. After scolding, he looked at Uncle Chi. Give the order. I don't want to see that B**** live in this world. No matter who you find, no matter what method you use, I don't want to see him again. Uncle Chi had followed Jean Kuen for the longest time. When he heard his decision, he couldn't help but frown. Master Kuen, Jean Hausa's ability is not bad. Wouldn't it be a pity to get rid of him just like that? Others didn't know what Jean Hausa had done all these years, but Uncle Chi knew it very well. If such a capable person could really take over the Jean family would definitely be able to continue their glory. Don't even think about it. Jean Kuen didn't consider this suggestion at all. Even if my Jean family's things are thrown away, donated, and squandered, I definitely won't give them to that B****. Uncle Chi was speechless, but he could understand Jean Kuen's concerns. Jean Kuen didn't care if he understood or not. What he needed to do now was to get rid of Jean Hausa, who was an eyesore. Do as I say. Jean Hausa didn't know that someone wanted his life. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care. He had been very busy in Qing City for the past 2 days, very busy. On one hand, he had personally negotiated the cooperation with Tianji. With this business, the company would definitely rise to a higher level. On the other hand, he was also preparing a congratulatory gift. In order to build momentum for Jean-Yi, Jean Kuen actually held a banquet for Jean-Yi. Before the banquet began, Jean Kuen specially asked the doctor to come over and examine him. He was also in good spirits. Tonight was a big day, so no matter how angry he was, he wouldn't show it. The Jean family had been operating in Qing City for decades, and their relationships were very complicated. There were also many people. Since Jean Kuen wanted to support Jean-Yi, the scene naturally wouldn't be small. It could even be said to be quite a big scene. He first appeared with Jean-Yi and introduced him in front of everyone. This was his grandson. In the future, he would be in charge of some of the Jean family's business. When he said this, he didn't have to care about other people's feelings at all. Naturally, he didn't know that other than Jean-Yi's father, Jean Ji, the rest of the people present didn't look too good. Especially Jean Lai. His face was so gloomy that it could almost drip blood. Jean Kuen had always been used to being self-centered, not to mention the thoughts of his son and grandson. He had never cared about anyone's thoughts for so many years. However, just when he was having a good time, 2 uninvited guests came to the venue. Jean Kuen, who was originally bringing Jean-Yi around the venue to identify people, suddenly had a bad premonition when he saw the people. He instinctively looked at Uncle Chi, but Uncle Chi didn't expect such people to come on such a day. He was stunned for a moment. Soon, the 2 of them walked to Jean Kuen's wheelchair. Jean Hausa got on the plane. The private plane was already ready and could take off at any time. He was still waiting for the final news. 5 minutes later, it was time to take off, and the news he was waiting for had also come back. Tang Hua hung up the phone and walked towards Jean Hausa with a smile on his face. Boss, the old man is in the hospital again. Jean Hausa wasn't surprised at all. Ever since Jean Kuen had a stroke last time, his health hadn't been as good as before. If he was provoked again tonight, it would be strange if he didn't go to the hospital. Boss, do you think the old man will die just like that? If that was really the case, it would be too easy for Jean Kuan. After so many years, who knew how many bad things he had done? Yet there was no retribution at all. No. Jean Hausa was extremely calm. After a short period of happiness, he was thinking about what they were going to do next. The old man won't die so easily. Even if he was struck by the wind again, or if he fell ill again and couldn't move his entire body, he wouldn't die so easily. After all, the Jean family was relying on him to support it. Jean Kuan knew very well that if he fell, the Jean family would have no leader. When the time came, the people outside would attack them together. Even if the Jean family was big, they wouldn't be able to withstand it easily. What a pity. Tang Hua punched the seat under him. Boss, you should have killed him directly. Jean Hausa shook his head. Kill Jean Kuan? No. He didn't have that thought yet. His only thought right now was that Jean Kuan couldn't die so easily. Because that would be too easy on him. He didn't know how much he hated Jean Kuan. He hated him so much that he wanted to cut him into pieces. Hua, keep an eye on him during this period of time. With such a thing happening to Jean Kuan, I'm afraid the Jean family won't be peaceful either. You have to pay more attention. Don't worry, I know. Tang Hua looked at Jean Hausa. But you, boss, you have to pay more attention. We've been doing so much recently. I'm afraid that the old man will attack you. No. He probably won't have time to deal with me for the time being. Jean Hausa thought of something, and the corners of his lips curled up again. He should be having a headache about the big gift I gave him now. Tang Hua smiled and was relieved. Jean Hausa didn't stay idle even when he was on the plane. He almost didn't rest on the plane. He had been dealing with business. When the plane landed, it was already night time in Lin City. Jean Hausa looked at the time. It was almost 10 o'clock. Tang Hua asked him where he was going. He seemed to have thought of something and answered with 4 words. After he finished speaking, he realized that he was talking about Shi Mingwan's home address. Without taking back his words, the driver drove the car to Yayuan apartment. By the time they arrived at Shi Mingwan's home, it was already past 11 o'clock. Boss. Tang Hua looked upstairs and then at Jean Hausa. You? Jean Hausa got out of the car and turned to look at Tang Hua. Help me send my luggage back to the apartment and pick me up tomorrow morning. Boss? Tang Hua had concerns, but Jean Hausa didn't. He turned around and went upstairs. Standing at Shi Mingwan's door, Jean Hausa closed his eyes. He thought for a moment and took out a bunch of keys from his pocket. If Shi Mingwan saw this, she would definitely scream and scold Jean Hausa for not keeping his word. Jean Hausa didn't have that many concerns. He opened the door with the key and found the direction of the room with familiarity. He had asked before he came. The person he had arranged here told him that Shi Mingwan had already returned to her hometown, so Shi Mingwan was the only one in the apartment now. The living room was very quiet and there was no light at all. The darkness didn't affect Jean Hausa's performance. He just took advantage of the night. He entered Shi Mingwan's room with familiarity. Chapter 691. The room was very quiet, so quiet that he could hear Shi Mingwan's steady breathing. Jean Hausa didn't move either. He just sat there and looked at Shi Mingwan's face. Time passed bit by bit. The east gradually turned white and Shi Mingwan, who was on the bed, turned around. In this way he was completely facing Jean Hausa. He lowered his head and planted a gentle kiss on her forehead. The kiss was very light, like a feather brushing across Shi Mingwan's forehead. She furrowed her brows in her sleep. Jean Hausa didn't smooth her eyebrows. He looked at her for a while, and after confirming that she didn't show any signs of waking up, he got up and left. When he went downstairs, Tang Hua was still waiting. Seeing Jean Hausa's expression, he sighed. Boss, let's go. Jean Hausa got into the car and looked back at the apartment. I'm afraid there's going to be a tough battle. He had made so many moves recently. The Jean family probably wouldn't let the matter rest so easily. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to see Shi Mingwan for a while. Boss. Tang Hua looked at Jean Hausa and sighed in his heart. You're too tired. Jean Hausa leaned back and closed his eyes to rest. Just when Tang Hua thought that he would not speak, he let out an extremely faint sigh. It doesn't matter. I'm used to it anyway. For so many years he had racked his brains, not daring to relax in the slightest. Whether it was at the Qin family or back to Qingqing. Tang Hua pursed his lips into a straight line and turned his face to signal the driver to drive. His eyes were a little red. After sorting out his emotions, Tang Hua looked at Jean Hausa again. Where are we going next? Let's go into the company and arrange everything. We'll return to Qing City tonight. Yes. Jean Hausa had a lot of things to do in the company. In the past few years he had put in a lot of effort to expand his business. He needed to have the strength to fight against the Jean family in the shortest time possible. Although it was difficult, it was something he had no choice but to do. It took him a day to settle most of the company's affairs and arrange for the people to guard the company. He signed the 2 contracts that were originally scheduled to be signed. From now on he would focus all his energy on Qingqing. That was his main battlefield. Before boarding the plane, he didn't forget to ask Tang Hua about Zhang Kuan's current situation. After our people let Zhan Li and Zhan Yang cause such a ruckus yesterday, the old man was sent to the hospital. It is said that the rescue lasted until the second half of the night. He's still in the ICU. Tang Hua's words were full of schadenfreude, but there was also some worry on his face. Boss, do you think the old man will die just like this? I won't. Jean Hausa sneered. I told you he still has things to worry about. He won't die just like that. Then should we postpone the plan for now? No need. Jean Hausa was impatient and didn't want to slow down. Let's see when the old man wakes up. I still have to give them my second big gift. Tang Hua smiled. Big gift? Wasn't this a great gift? The old man would probably faint if he accepted Jean Hausa's gift. It wasn't that he fainted from happiness but from anger. Zhang Kuan was in the ICU. The 2 brothers, Zhan Lai and Zhan Ji, stood guard outside. Zhan Lai sat on the bench and looked anxiously at the emergency room, which was lit up with lights. His wife, Bai Shuqiao, was sitting next to him. She also looked anxious. Compared to them, although the expression on Zhan Ji's face was also very solemn, he didn't look very anxious. He glanced at his son. Zhan Yi understood and turned to walk out. Zhan Li and Zhan Yang blocked in front of him. The 2 of them didn't look very good at this moment. Both of them had bruised noses and swollen faces. Zhan Li's arm was still bandaged. It was obvious that his hand had been broken by someone. Zhan Yang wasn't much better. His face was also covered in injuries. Although there were no obvious fractures and it wasn't as serious as Zhan Li's, the color of his face was really very good looking. These 2 combinations made people feel strange and funny at first glance. However, no one at the scene could laugh. Zhan Yi, where are you going? You're not trying to escape, are you? Although Zhan Li and Zhan Yang weren't the most ideal heirs in Zhang Kuan's eyes. But no matter what, they had grown up with Zhan Lai in the old mansion. These 2 brothers couldn't be said to be close to Zhang Kuan since they were young, but at least they could show their faces in front of Zhang Kuan more than those who couldn't show their faces outside. However, the 2 of them didn't expect Zhan Yi to appear out of nowhere. It was fine if Zhan Yi appeared. The 2 of them had suffered such a big loss at Zhan Yi's hands. Therefore, the 2 of them looked at Zhan Yi with resentment. Zhan Yi wasn't afraid of their provocation at all. He was quite calm. Escape? Do I need to escape? Where do I escape to? It's just that Grandpa told me to do something, although Grandpa is unconscious now. But I still have to finish what Grandpa told me to do. Otherwise, when Grandpa wakes up, he won't be happy. He was still young after all. He was suddenly brought back from the outside. Zhan Yi couldn't control the smugness on his face. Zhan Li and Zhan Yang were furious. Especially Zhan Yang. Zhan Yi, you want to leave just like that? No way. If you don't make things clear today, don't even think about leaving. That's right. If you don't make things clear, don't even think about leaving. Zhan Li glared at Zhan Yi and raised his uninjured hand to point at him. You beat the 2 of us up like this and you want to leave just like that? Yesterday, Zhan Li and Zhan Yang entered the venue with injuries all over their bodies. As soon as they entered the door, they rushed towards Zhan Yi. Although the 2 of them were injured, they won because there were 2 of them. One of them punched Zhan Yi and the other kicked him. Zhan Yi was protected by Zhang Kuan, so he wasn't injured. However, such a good day was ruined by Zhan Li and Zhan Yang. Zhang Kuan couldn't stand such a stimulation, and he didn't expect that the banquet he had meticulously arranged would have such a big mistake. In his anger, he was directly sent to the emergency room. Idiots! Zhan Yi sneered as he looked at the 2 people in front of him. Don't you go out with your brains? Zhan Yi, what do you mean? Zhan Yi, you bastard. Zhan Yang reached out his hand and was about to swing it at Zhan Yi's face again. Zhan Yi barely avoided it. He shook his head and looked at the 2 idiot brothers in front of him with some mockery. You said I beat you up? Are you saying that I did this to you? Without waiting for the 2 brothers to speak, Zhan Yi took a step forward. Why don't you think about it? Would I do such a stupid thing? You're basically being used by others without knowing it. If he isn't an idiot, then what is he? Yesterday was the first time Jean-Yi showed his face in front of others. It was supposed to be a great thing. But Jean Li and Jean Yang, who were outside, suddenly returned. It was one thing for him to come back, but he was injured all over and even attacked him the moment he arrived. That action was a slap on Jean Kuen's face. This angered Jean Kuen. He was so angry that he had to be hospitalized. At that time, Jean-Yi was busy acting as a filial son and grandson in front of the old man. He naturally didn't have the time to bicker with Jean Li and Jean Yang. However, he could be considered to have calmed down now. There was someone who wasn't on good terms with him, and was using the Jean Yang brothers to take care of him. Now that he saw that the two of them still had the time to find trouble with him, Jean Yi's tone was naturally not very good. If it weren't for your stupidity, Grandpa wouldn't have been sent to the hospital. With the intelligence of the two brothers, they really wouldn't have thought that they had been instigated and used as a tool. Now they heard Jean-Yi blame the reason why Jean Kuen was unconscious on them. Jean Li and Jean Yang's expressions changed. Say that again? They were out on a business trip, and it could be considered that they were exhausted for the Jean family. But what news did they hear? Jean Kuen actually recognized the child of another illegitimate child. He even planned to publicly introduce it into the upper class of Qing City? How could they allow such a thing to happen? Therefore, the two brothers hurriedly finished their work and returned to Qing City as soon as possible. They wanted to ask where this Jean-Yi came from. One had to know that all the children of the Jean family, without Jean Kuen's acknowledgement, even if their surname was Jean, it was useless. But when the two of them returned to Qing City, they were beaten up as soon as they got off the plane. The person who beat them up made it very clear that today was Jean-Yi's good day. He told them to be a little more perceptive and not come to cause trouble. This was something that had never happened to Jean Li and Jean Yang. Not only was it a great humiliation to be beaten up, but it was also a clear announcement of their status in the Jean family in the future. How could Jean Li and Jean Yang tolerate it? That was why they hurriedly came to teach Jean-Yi a lesson. Yesterday they were still fighting with him. Now that they were provoked by Jean Yi's words, the two of them stood forward together, intending to teach Jean-Yi a lesson. Jean-Yi wasn't afraid at all. You guys are really stupid. If you have the time to look for trouble with me here, you might as well think about how to find the culprit. Aren't you the culprit? Why are you pretending to be a good person here? Jean Li and Jean Yang were furious. The two of them took another step forward, and Jean Li's hand was almost about to poke Jean Yi's face. A stupid pig is a stupid pig. It's fine if you're impulsive, but you don't have a brain. Jean Yi's words angered the two of them. Before they could speak, Bai Shuqiao, who had been silent all this time, couldn't take it anymore and stood up. Enough. She walked in front of Jean-Yi and glared at the person who had snatched her son's position. It's not your turn to make decisions in the Jean family yet. No matter how bad Jean Li and Jean Yang are, they were still raised by the old master. Who do you think you are? Jean Ji was indignant. The juniors were quarreling, so why did Bai Shuqiao jump out? I say, sister-in-law, although you're the sister-in-law, you have to be reasonable. But you have to be reasonable when you speak and do things. The old master was originally angry because of them. Our Jean-Yi isn't wrong. As one of Jean Kuen's sons, Jean Ji was quite capable. Otherwise, how could the old man acknowledge his existence when he had so many illegitimate children outside? But no matter how capable he was, he couldn't withstand the old man wholeheartedly supporting Jean Lai. But he desperately suppressed his sons who were outside. Now, it wasn't easy for the old man to be willing to help the younger generation. Especially since his son had actually caught the old man's eye. As a father, he naturally had to support his son at this time. They were arguing fiercely on this side, but Uncle Chi could only sigh in his heart when he saw it. How decisive and resourceful was Jean Kuen back then. But looking at the people of the Jean family now, other than Jean Lai who could barely take on the role, none of the remaining third generation could take on a big responsibility. No, there was one. Uncle Chi thought of that person. Although Jean Kuen didn't like Jean Hausa, if Jean Hausa could be used by the Jean family could regain its glory in his hands. However, Jean Kuen's order was to take Jean Hausa's life. Uncle Chi hadn't had the time to order his subordinates to deal with Jean Hausa yesterday. He had already prepared the Jean family's kill order, but now he was a little hesitant. Perhaps there was no need to kill Jean Hausa. The old master didn't have many days left. It was better to think of a way to take Jean Hausa in for his own use. Of course, if he really wanted to achieve that goal, he would probably have to go through some trouble. Uncle Chi thought of this, looked at the people in front of him, and turned around to do what he wanted to do. He had been by Jean Kuen's side for more than 30 years. His words could represent Jean Kuen's intentions. This time he would let him make his own decision. Jean Hausa didn't care about what the Jean family had done because of him. He was busy preparing the second gift. At night, the people of the Jean family were tired of arguing, so they couldn't be bothered to argue anymore. There weren't many who really cared about the old man. When it was time, everyone except Jean Lai went to rest. Jean Lai couldn't take it anymore and went to rest in the middle of the night. To be honest, there were doctors and nurses in the VIP ward. There was no need for them to guard here. But there was only one purpose for these people to guard here. They wanted Jean Kun to see them first when he woke up. They wanted to get attention and perform well. Jean Lai had been acting as a filial son for a long time. He was sleepy now, so he naturally went to rest. Other than the bodyguards, there was no one else in the ward. Just like last time, Jean Hausa easily entered the ward. But this time the old man didn't wake up. In fact, the stimulation Jean Kun received this time wasn't as big as the last time, but it was even more serious than the last time. It really wasn't because he saw Jean Li and Jean Yang, the two idiots, attack Jean Yi, that he flared up. It was because of this that he thought of the same problem as Uncle Chi, the problem that made him the most frustrated and conflicted. That was, the Jean family had developed for so many years. It had been a 100-year-old family since the late Qing dynasty, but when it came to him, it had actually fallen to the point where there was no successor. How could this not make Jean Kun depressed? Jean Yi was helpless. He was forced to make this choice. But no matter what, he had taught Jean Li and Jean Yang for a period of time, but they were still so stupid and so disregarding the overall situation. As the head of the Jean family, he wasn't qualified. Even as a descendant of the Jean family, he wasn't qualified. After being provoked like this, Jean Kun became serious again. He had woken up in the afternoon, but when he woke up, he heard Jean Li and Jean Yang arguing outside about teaching Jean Yi a lesson. As soon as he was provoked, he fainted again. Jean Hausa didn't have much time for Jean Kun. It was his business if he liked to sleep. His time was very precious. He took a look, picked up a glass of water from the bedside and slowly poured it on Jean Kun's face. Jean Kun was old and he hadn't recovered yet. Being splashed with cold water on his face, even though it wasn't cold in this season, made him uncomfortable. He woke up at the first moment and immediately discovered Jean Hausa standing by his bed. Jean Kun remembered, but his body had just suffered a stroke. How could he have the strength? Jean Hausa casually put the cup in his hand aside. He looked down at Jean Kun coldly. You, Jean Kun wiped the water off his face. When he saw Jean Hausa, he was shocked. Didn't he ask Uncle Chi to deal with this person? Why was he still here? What about me? Jean Hausa sneered. I'm here because I have a gift for you. Jean Kun looked at him defensively. He didn't believe that Jean Hausa would be so kind. You get out. I don't want your gift. Don't you want to hear what I'm giving you? When Jean Hausa spoke, the smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. His entire person looked cold and gloomy. Get out. I don't want to see you. There was killing intent in Jean Kun's eyes. After today's matter, he would definitely ask Uncle Chi to kill Jean Hausa. I don't want to see you either. I've already said that I'm just here to give you a gift. Jean Hausa looked at his face and said two words very slowly. Jean Kun's expression changed. He tried to get up. Jean Hausa reached out a hand and pressed it on his chest. Jean Kun was old, so he couldn't break free at all. You be asterisk starred, let go of me. He cursed, and Jean Hausa's strength increased by 30%. Jean Kun's face suddenly turned pale. He glared at Jean Hausa, almost glaring a hole in his eyes. Do you know why the celebrity house and the fragrance house were closed? Jean Hausa exerted force in his hand. Looking at Jean Kun's angry and painful appearance, but he couldn't resist, he only felt happy. One was closed because it was involved in drugs. The other was closed because it was suspected of organizing to sell silver. At this point, Jean Hausa smiled. Next is the Heavenly Fragrance Restaurant, Spring of the Four Seasons. In the future, these businesses will close down in your hands one by one. Are you happy? What Jean Hausa said was all about the Jean family's business that was making a lot of money every day. Every one of them had a chain. They operated different projects in different categories. The only thing they had in common was that these were all profitable businesses. Jean Kun pointed at Jean Hausa. No one had told him about this matter yet. Must have just happened today. All right. I'm afraid that you'll be too worried and won't be able to recuperate in the hospital. He purposely snored. Since it's a seizure, it'll naturally take a little longer. It's not long to seize it for a year or so, don't you think? B asterisk starred, you B asterisk starred. Other than this sentence, Jean Cohen didn't have any other words to curse. Jean Hausa sneered and finally let go of his hand. He took out a handkerchief from his pocket and slowly wiped his hand. In the end, he threw the handkerchief at Jean Cohen's face. Jean Cohen was so angry by his action that he coughed again. Jean Hausa moved his face closer. This is just the beginning. Don't worry. I will definitely destroy the Jean family in my hands. Jean Cohen couldn't even speak properly. He could only point at Jean Hausa and keep panting. Jean Hausa wasn't in the mood to admire his sorry state anymore. He turned around and left. He was about to go downstairs, but he accidentally saw Jean lie in the corridor outside. Seeing the person, Jean Hausa directly walked past him and was about to leave. However, Jean Lai blocked in front of him. Why are you here? As he spoke, he looked in the direction of the ward. He didn't know what Jean Hausa wanted to do. Jean Hausa ignored him and walked past him. Seeing him like this, Jean Lai couldn't help but say, Jean Hausa, no matter what, you're a descendant of the Jean family. You, Mr. Jean, be careful with your words. Jean Hausa stood still and said without turning his head, although my surname is Jean, I'm not a descendant of the Jean family. I'm you? Jean Lai didn't finish his sentence. Jean Hausa suddenly turned around. He reached out and grabbed the front of Jean Lai's shirt. Mr. Jean. He used all his strength. The sinister expression on his face made people think that he was Satan from hell. What are you to me? Say it, why aren't you saying it? Jean Lai shrunk his neck. Facing Jean Hausa's expression, he didn't dare to answer him for a moment. If Mr. Jean wants to live longer, it's better to think clearly. Jean Hausa stood up straight as he spoke. His cold eyes didn't have a trace of warmth. After all, to me, my parents are already dead. Jean Lai's face was a little pale. Jean Hausa let go of his hand and took a step back. He clapped his hands, his gaze cold. If Mr. Jean doesn't know how to speak, I don't mind sending you to meet them in advance. What do you think? Jean Lai's aura was instantly suppressed by Jean Hausa, and he didn't dare to speak again. Jean Hausa looked at him and felt bored. He turned around and left. For the next month, Jean Hausa didn't go anywhere. He stayed in Qing City and focused on dealing with the Jean family's businesses. The Jean family had many businesses, including the entertainment industry, the real estate industry, and the electronics industry. They were all involved in traditional industries. A month wasn't a short time, but the Jean family had too many businesses. With his current ability, it was impossible to destroy the Jean family in a day. He could only destroy them one by one. Jean Hausa had bought a business in Qing City a few years ago. He bought the best location in the Cherry Blossom Villa. During this period of time, he had been living in the Cherry Blossom Villa. On one hand, he had to deal with the Jean family, and on the other hand, he had to prepare to move some of the company's main businesses to Qing City. Jean Hausa didn't expect that after more than a month of silence, someone from the Jean family would actually take the initiative to look for him. Looking at Uncle Chi in front of him, Jean Hausa sat down on the sofa expressionlessly. The Cherry Blossom Villa was decorated according to his preferences. It was simple but grand. Uncle Chi came in and took a few glances. When he saw Jean Hausa, he took 2 steps forward and stood opposite him. Hausa. Uncle Chi was older than Jean Lai. He called Jean Hausa's name to show his friendliness. Unfortunately, the person he met was Jean Hausa. What's the matter? Uncle Chi smiled bitterly in his heart. Jean Hausa had suppressed some of the Jean family's businesses, but now he was asking him what was the matter? Hausa, the Jean family is your family no matter what. What you're doing now isn't appropriate, right? What did I do? Jean Hausa raised his eyebrows as if he didn't quite understand what Uncle Chi meant. I won't repeat what you did. From the celebrity hall until now, many of the Jean family's businesses had been involved. Although it wasn't enough to shake the foundation, as a result, the entire Jean family was indeed in a state of panic. Uncle Chi originally wanted to get someone to make a move on Jean Hausa, but after these days not only did he not make a move, but he also couldn't bear to. Chapter 692. Get the Jean family? Jean Hausa felt that this person was ridiculous. When did he ever want to get the Jean family? Whether it was money or status, he preferred to earn it with his own hands. He didn't want anything from the Jean family. In his heart, there would only be one outcome for the Jean family in the future, and that was to be destroyed by him with his own hands. He was already doing so, and it was only a matter of time before he reached the final step. Even Jean Hausa had to admit that it wasn't unreasonable for Jean Cohen to be ruthless and ruthless. Just look at the power and momentum that the Jean family had developed in his hands all these years. But so what? He was not afraid at all. Did you come here just to talk nonsense? Uncle Chi choked. When he thought of his purpose in coming here, he wanted to explode, but he had no choice but to calm himself down. The Jean family had a large business. I'm sure you've seen the abilities of the other descendants of the third generation. Since that was the case, why not take a step back? Your goal is just to get the Jean family. Now I'll go and convince the old man to give you the Jean family, and you'll stop your actions. How about that? Uncle Chi felt that this was very good. He had followed Jean Kuan for many years and knew Jean Kuan's temper and personality very well. Now Jean Kuan was already so sick. In the past month, if it wasn't for the fact that he couldn't see the Jean family fall in his hands, Jean Kuan would have been completely unable to hold on. Uncle Chi had been holding on to the Jean family's kill order for nearly 2 months, but he hadn't sent it out. It wasn't because he was soft-hearted or because of other reasons. It was just that after weighing the pros and cons, he realized that letting Jean Hausa take over the Jean family was the best outcome. Although he knew that this was the best outcome, all these years he had always been by the Jean family and Jean Kuan's side. His position was the same as Jean Kuan's in some respects. To Jean Hausa, such a big surprise was a great gift. Unfortunately, he didn't know much about Jean Hausa. He thought that Jean Hausa was with Jean Yi and the others. However, he didn't know that in Jean Hausa's heart, nothing could compare to his determination to destroy the Jean family. Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes and looked at Uncle Chi's face. Give me the Jean family? Yes. Are you sure? Of course. Uncle Chi still had a trace of pride in his heart. Isn't this your goal? Jean Hausa pursed his lips into a straight line. He looked straight at Uncle Chi, his eyes cold. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes was unbearable. Uncle Chi suddenly realized that something was wrong. No matter what, he was an old man who had been by Jean Kuan's side for a long time. How could he be shocked by the gaze of a junior? But in that instant he actually felt a chill run down his spine. Jean Hausa didn't speak. Uncle Chi swallowed his saliva and tried his best to stabilize his tone. You should know what to do for such a good thing, right? Jean Hausa, who was sitting on the sofa, finally changed his posture. He snapped his fingers. Soon someone came in. Throw it out. These 3 simple words caused Uncle Chi's eyes to widen. He couldn't believe that the face he had been proud of in front of Jean Kuan for half his life had disappeared just like that. Jean Hausa, do you know what you're doing? Uncle Chi's expression changed the moment his arm was lifted. Before he was dragged away, Jean Hausa finally got up. He walked in front of Uncle Chi extremely slowly and looked at Uncle Chi with sinister eyes. I've always known what I'm doing. It's you guys who don't know. I don't care about the Jean family. All I want is to destroy him. Looking at Uncle Chi's shocked eyes, he curled his lips coldly. After all, someone has to be buried with them for what happened back then. Don't you think so? Uncle Chi was really shocked this time. He widened his eyes and looked at Jean Hausa. He couldn't believe that Jean Hausa actually knew what happened back then. What nonsense are you talking about? What happened back then? He wanted to play dumb, but Jean Hausa didn't have the patience to accompany him. He waved his hand and said, throw it out. Uncle Chi, who had been by Jean Kuan's side for half his life, was thrown out just like that. Jean Hausa sat back on the sofa, and Tang Hua entered the door at this moment. He bent down. Boss, Jean Yi asked someone to pass a message that he wants to see you. Jean Yi. Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes and thought of some of Jean Yi's recent actions. He still had some ability, but compared to his determination, it wasn't enough. I won't see him. Jean Hausa stood up. Prepare the plane and fly to Lin City. Let 6th and 7th brother keep a close eye on the rest of the matters here. Yes. Tang Hua looked at Jean Hausa's expression and had the rare thought of joking with him. Do you want to see sister-in-law? It had been 2 months since Jean Hausa last returned to Lin City. Jean Hausa glared at Tang Hua. He didn't deny it, but his footsteps quickened. In the past 2 months, Shi Mingwan's life had been very smooth. After the French competition, the studio recruited 2 more newcomers. The newcomers' abilities weren't bad. After trying them out for more than 2 months, she realized that they were all promising talents. The design concept and ideas were also very compatible with her. The studio's business was booming, and she also began to get involved in work, making herself busy. Ever since that day, Jean Hausa never came to look for her again. She had dreamed of that man. She dreamed that he had secretly made the key to her house again and came to her house to see her. However, when she woke up, she realized that it was a dream. After she woke up, she even smelled John House's aura in the room. This made her wonder if she was hallucinating. Fortunately, she never dreamed of John House again after that day. This made her relax, but at the same time she felt a little disappointed. It was impossible to forget, not for the rest of her life. Whether it was their first encounter when she was 12 years old or everything after their reunion. For Shi Mengwan, those were memories engraved in the depths of her heart and couldn't be forgotten. She was still thinking that perhaps she needed more time to force herself to forget everything. However, before she could give herself time to calm down, Mother Shi couldn't sit still anymore. Ever since she saw Jean Hauser last time, Mother Shi had been worried. She originally thought that Shi Mengwan was a child who knew her limits, but she never expected that she would actually have something to do with someone who had a fiancé. This wasn't something Mother Shi could tolerate. After thinking about it, she felt that she had cared too little about Shi Mengwan. So when she returned home, she thought about it carefully and felt that she still had to let Shi Mengwan go on a blind date. The people she knew outside were so unreliable. But a blind date was different. The people she met on a blind date were, firstly, they knew each other well, and secondly, as a mother she could help check them out. What could be more suitable and ideal than this? After thinking it through, Mother Shi took Shi Mengwan's matter to heart. The unlucky one was Shi Mengwan. Her mother arranged blind dates every 2 or 3 days. As for the blind dates, most of them were from the town. Other than the town, there were also some distant relatives who were far away and had no relationship with Shi Mengwan. When they heard that Mother Shi was looking for someone to go on a blind date with Shi Mengwan, they introduced them. From the town, from the county, and from Lin City. Shi Mengwan was extremely annoyed, but she couldn't refuse. As soon as she refused, Mother Shi asked, "Are you still unable to forget that guy surnamed Jean?" As soon as these words came over, in order to prove that she had forgotten about that guy surnamed Jean, Shi Mengwan had been on many blind dates during this period of time. That afternoon she was just about to ask Xiaoji to order takeout. Her phone rang. It was still Mother Shi. Without exception, it was about her blind date again. First she talked about the man's conditions, then how good he was. Of course, all the blind dates, without exception, were able to accept marrying into the family. They were willing to be a live-in son-in-law, and the child they gave birth to would be surnamed Shi. Sometimes Shi Mengwan couldn't help but admire her. Where did her mother find so many people who were willing to agree to her family's conditions? Or could it be that men nowadays had already settled for the next best thing? She heard that the ratio of men to women was out of balance. In 2 years there would be at least 30 million bachelors. In the past, Shi Mengwan didn't believe it, but now that she thought about it, it might really be true. After all, if it weren't for the fact that so many men couldn't get a wife, how could they casually agree to such conditions? She sighed in her heart and finally hung up the phone. However, not long after, her phone rang again. Shi Mengwan was already weak. "Hey, what's wrong?" "Hello, Mom." Afraid that Mother Shi would miss her for a long time again, she spoke first. "I understand. Don't remind me anymore. Tonight at 7 p.m. Starlight Cafe. Don't worry, since I promised you, I will naturally go." However, the person on the other end of the phone was a familiar voice to Shi Mengwan. "Mengwan, are you going on a blind date?" Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. Only then did she realize that she had hung up the phone without looking at the caller ID. "Wan Xianyang? It's me." Wan Xianyang's voice sounded a little mischievous. "Mengwan is going on a blind date, but she actually didn't consider me. It really makes me sad." Wan Xianyang. Shi Mengwan really couldn't respond to this. "You, just cancel your blind date tonight. With me around, what blind date do you need?" "How? That was arranged by my mother." "Do you have Auntie's phone number? Do you need me to call her personally to explain?" Wan Xianyang stopped fooling around. How could Shi Mengwan dare to let him contact Mother Shi? It wouldn't be good if there was a misunderstanding. "I'm not fooling around. I'm serious." Wan Xianyang. Shi Mengwan had a headache. "Don't cause trouble. I'll solve it myself." Using the excuse that she was going to eat, Shi Mengwan sent Wan Xianyang away. After hanging up the phone, Shi Mengwan was in a daze for a long time. What she liked didn't like her. What she liked didn't like her. It really was. Shi Mengwan thought about it and didn't continue to take this matter to heart. Right now, she had received another order, and the other party specifically asked her to design it. So she busied herself again. When it was time to get off work, Shi Mengwan, who didn't want to give up, decided to go to Starlight Cafe. Little Ji, Little Chio, and the others hadn't gotten off work yet. When they saw Shi Mengwan's fearless expression, they were a little amused. It was a secret of the whole studio that Shi Mengwan was forced to go on a blind date. After all, Mother Sure had specially come to the studio before she left last time. Firstly, he wanted to see his daughter's working environment and thank these people for taking care of her. Secondly, he was here to see if there were any suitable candidates for his daughter. Later on, he would call from time to time to arrange blind dates. If Shi Mingwan didn't pick up the phone, someone would pick it up for her. In this way, the entire studio knew about it. Their expressions of watching a good show provoked Shi Mingwan. She gritted her teeth and glared at those people. If you guys keep laughing, you won't get your bonus this month. Xiao Ji and the others didn't dare to laugh. Shi Mingwan finally felt much better. However, he still had no choice but to go to Starlight Cafe. It was said that the location of the blind date was arranged by the blind date. It was quite close to Shi Mingwan's studio. Even if Shi Mingwan was unwilling, she had to admit it. The person arranged by Mother Shi was quite reliable. There were very few weirdos like what they said on the internet. That was true. After Shi Mingwan saw Zhan Haoze, she became paranoid. Although there were quite a few men, they all wanted to dig up the 18 generations of each other's ancestors. Under such circumstances, the blind dates that appeared in front of Shi Mingwan were really acceptable. After entering the door, Shi Mingwan's gaze subconsciously searched for her, who she didn't know was the 18th or 19th blind date. Before she came, Shi Mingwan had already sent the photo to her phone. She hadn't had the time to look at it. Now she took out her phone and took a look. The bespectacled man looked gentle and cultured. He wasn't her type. Now that he was here, she had to meet him. Looking around, she didn't find her blind date. Shi Mingwan picked up a seat and sat down. She picked up her phone and scrolled through Weibo. There was one hot topic today, and it was asking about the weirdo blind dates you've met. Shi Mingwan casually glanced at it and looked at the variety of weirdo men on it. She agreed with Mother Shi's taste a lot. To be honest, if it weren't for the fact that she couldn't forget about Zhan Haoze, she would have randomly picked one of the blind dates that Shi Mingwan had chosen. It wouldn't have been too bad. However, today's blind date didn't appear for a long time. Shi Mingwan looked at the time. It had already been 10 minutes since 7 o'clock, but the blind date hadn't arrived yet. This had never happened before. Could something have happened on the way? Shi Mingwan didn't want to think so, but she still had to think of calling to contact him. However, before she could get through, someone had already sat down opposite her. Mingwan. Wan Xianying was holding a large bouquet of roses in his hand. Looking at Shi Mingwan's surprised face, he smiled brightly. Long time no see. Shi Mingwan wasn't in a hurry to take the flowers that Wan Xianying handed over. She didn't get through, so she was still thinking about continuing. If you want to call your blind date with the surname Chin, you don't have to. Wan Xianying reminded her very kindly, I've already talked to him just now. After he heard that I'm your boyfriend, he was very generous and said that he wished us happiness. Shi Mingwan didn't know what expression she was going to put on anymore. Looking at Wan Xianying, she sighed in her heart. Wan Xianying, actually, you don't have to do this. I can handle it. Wan Xianying frowned. Do you think I'm trying to help you get rid of your blind date? Isn't it? Of course not. Wan Xianying stood up angrily, then quickly sat down again. He put the bouquet of flowers aside and looked at Shi Mingwan's face very seriously. I'm serious. Since you want to go on a blind date, why didn't you consider me? Would I be worse than those blind dates? Stop fooling around. It was that bespectacled man just now. He didn't even do anything. He just shook his fist and the other party retreated. How could such a man be worthy of Wan? I didn't mean that. Then what did you mean? Wan Xianying originally didn't plan to meet Shi Mingwan this time. After all, he could only stay in Lin City for 2 days this time, and there were still many things he hadn't done. However, he originally wanted to make a call to make his presence known in front of Shi Mingwan, but he didn't expect to hear about I-80th, which she was going on a blind date. We're not suitable. What's not suitable? Wan Xianying didn't understand. You're talking about family background. My family isn't the kind of family that looks after their disciples. Our Wan family also has a precedent of marriage alliances with small families. You're talking about feelings. I'm sincere to you. Isn't that better than those blind dates that we've only met a few times? Besides, even if you feel that you won't have a partner when you marry to Rong City and are unwilling, don't you still have sister-in-law? Wu Jiniao and I are childhood friends. If you really get together with me, won't you be able to keep sister-in-law company? I really can't think of how I'm not as good as those blind dates of yours. Ever since they met, Wan Xianying had always been gentle and polite. His humor didn't hide his utilitarian nature as a businessman. However, it was the first time Shi Mingwan had seen Wan Xianying say such a long string of words in one breath. She shifted her gaze slightly and looked at the bouquet of red roses. Because you'll never be able to meet my conditions. What do you mean? Wan Xianying didn't quite understand. On one hand, Shi Mingwan really wanted him to give up, and on the other hand she was also very serious about her conditions. My mother and my father only had 2 daughters, me and my sister. And I promised my parents that if I want to get married in the future, I'll find a son-in-law. Son-in-law? Wan Xianying's expression was a little strange. What do you mean? That's right. Our family wants our son-in-law to marry into our family. The child we give birth to will have my surname. Shi Mingwan's words were especially firm. This time Wan Xianying wasn't in a hurry to speak. He sat on the chair as if he didn't expect Shi Mingwan to say such a thing. Are you joking with me? No. Shi Mingwan shook her head. I'm serious. Seeing that Wan Xianying still hadn't reacted, she said very softly, Wan Xianying, don't waste time on me. I know your identity very well, so I know that your family won't let you be a son-in-law, and it's even more impossible for the child you give birth to have my surname. Since you know it's impossible, why are you so obsessed with me? Shi Mingwan hadn't specially inquired about Wan Xianying's family background, but there were some things that she didn't need to inquire about to know. Wu Jingyao's childhood friend had quite an impressive family background. The antique shop under his name was almost making a lot of money every day. He had a family background and he had an external appearance. How could such a man agree to marry into the family? Shi Mingwan said all she had to say. She took advantage of Wan Xianying's daze to stand up. She said that she was going to the bathroom, but she was actually giving Wan Xianying time to digest her words. She believed that Wan Xianying understood and might leave later. She went into the bathroom and washed her face to calm down. No matter what, today's blind date was avoided. After all, with Wan Xianying around, she didn't need to send away the previous blind date. However, she was happy too early. The water on her face hadn't dried yet when Mother Shi called. What's wrong with you? Are you with that Zhang guy again? Why did I hear that you didn't go on a blind date properly, but got someone to chase that person away? Mom, it's nothing like that. If it's not Zhang, then who is it? Wan, don't tell me you didn't want to go on a blind date so you found a random man to brush me off? I didn't, Mom. Shi Mingwan felt that sometimes she really couldn't talk to Mother Shi. While she was still thinking about how to explain, she kept walking forward. She walked a little too fast and didn't notice that there was someone in front of her. The moment her body bumped into someone, the phone in her palm almost flew out. When the phone left her palm, Shi Mingwan wanted to grab it, but the person was one step ahead of her. He caught the phone and placed it in her hand. Shi Mingwan stood there and subconsciously pinched it, but she couldn't care less about listening to Mother Shi's words. She just stared blankly at the person in front of her. The two of them hadn't seen each other for almost 2 months. The man in front of her was still tall, but his expression was tired. He had also lost a lot of weight. At this moment he was looking at her. His eyes were curved and he seemed to be full of gentleness. Shi Mingwan was shocked by his gaze. She even forgot that Mother Shi was still talking on the other end of the phone. It wasn't until Mother Shi roared again that she casually said that she had something to do and hung up the phone. Just as she hung up the phone, her body was pulled into the arms of the man in front of her. He hugged her a little hard, but he restrained himself from hurting her. He gently rubbed his chin against the top of her hair. Shi Mingwan's body stiffened. She didn't expect Zhang Haoze to appear in front of her again. Wan. She heard his voice. I miss you so much. It was a gentle voice without a trace of hostility. Accompanied by his hug, he revealed his intentions in such a simple manner. Shi Mingwan couldn't move for a moment. She thought that it might be because she had suppressed herself too much for the past 2 months, so she was hallucinating. Otherwise, why would she see Zhang Haoze in broad daylight? It was one thing to see Zhang Haoze, but to see such a gentle Zhang Haoze. You? She wanted to speak. Her lips moved, but she didn't know what to say. Zhang Haoze gently tightened his arms and hugged her waist. He used half of his strength to pull her body closer to him. Wan, I miss you so much. He said it again. The weather in Lin City was getting colder, but it wasn't cold. The man was wearing a shirt and no tie. The temperature of his chest was burning her face. She couldn't help but raise her head to look at him. He was also looking at her. The moment their eyes met, he lowered his head and accurately kissed her lips. At that moment, Shi Mingwan seemed to see fireworks exploding in the sky. Chapter 693. Like in love couldn't be restrained. No matter how hard you tried when you liked someone, you couldn't hide your eyes or your expression. No matter how much homework you did and how much psychological preparation you had, it was useless. That low voice of "I miss you" made sure Mingwan lose all her armor. She had thought many times that she might meet him again, but she didn't expect to meet him like this. She thought that 2 months was enough for her to do psychological preparation, enough for her to forget the person in front of her, and then she could return to her usual indifference. But when she really met him, she realized that her heartstrings were pulled and she couldn't control them at all. Smelling the familiar scent on his body and feeling the warmth brought by their lips and teeth, for a moment, she couldn't extricate herself. The dizziness only lasted for a moment. Sure, Mingwan heard footsteps in the distance. She suddenly came back to her senses and pushed John Hausa away forcefully. She took a big step back. Because she retreated too quickly, Sure Mingwan's back hit the wall behind her. She felt a little pain, so she stabilized her body and stared at the man in front of her. Her gaze was very complicated. She lowered her eyes, and after a few breaths, the trace of charm just now completely dissipated. When she looked up again, Sure Mingwan's eyes were filled with rationality and not a trace of emotion. An uncontrollable kiss was already the limit she could give. She couldn't do or afford to give more. She looked at John Hausa warily and turned around to leave. However, John Hausa blocked in front of her. Wan. Didn't she like him just now? John Hausa, we've already broken up. Sure Mingwan said this very calmly. John Hausa's eyes darkened. Wan, I didn't agree. That's your business. I thought we had already reached a tacit understanding. Wan. Sorry, I won't be entangled with a man who has a fiancé. Sure Mingwan's attitude was firm. John Hausa went forward to stop her, but his phone rang just now. The number on it made him have no choice but to answer the call first. It was at this moment that Sure Mingwan left the corridor. When John Hausa hung up the phone and walked out, he couldn't see Sure Mingwan anymore. Of course, Wan Xianying also disappeared. Sure Mingwan sat in her car and looked at Wan Xianying, who got into the car uninvited. She felt a little helpless. She thought she had made herself clear. In fact, the 2-year agreement that Sure Mingwan mentioned at that time was indeed to shut Grandma Sure's mouth and stop her from having the idea of letting her parents adopt a child. But the other reason was that she wasn't sure how far she could go with John Hausa. Before that, she didn't want to get married, nor did she want to fall in love. He could use this as an excuse to avoid a lot of trouble. However, she didn't expect her mother to be so capable. Not only was she not repelled by her excuses and reasons, but she also found suitable men to go on blind dates with her again and again. On this point she was really convinced. The car stopped at her apartment and she looked at Wan Xianying helplessly. She had just said that she was not feeling well and wanted to go home to rest. Wan Xianying suggested that he send her home, no matter how she refused. When she reached the parking lot, he took her car keys and got in the car. Since you're not feeling well, let me drive. He knew that this was just her excuse, but Sure Mingwan really couldn't kick him out of the driver's seat. I'm already home. As Sure Mingwan spoke, she reached out her hand to Wan Xianying, gesturing for him to get out of the car and return the car keys to her. Wan Xianying got out of the car, but he didn't return the car keys to her. He was also very tall and he just stood in front of the car and looked at Sure Mingwan. That marrying into the family was something you deliberately made to make things difficult for me, right? What era was it now? Who would make such a request? Sure Mingwan's expression didn't change. She was very clear about Wan Xianying's family background. He was Hua Jinyao's childhood friend, so he probably wouldn't be too bad. No. I'm serious. Wan Xianying looked at her, seemingly a little conflicted. Seriously speaking, putting aside the 1 or 2 illegitimate children his old man had accidentally created outside. His mother only gave birth to him. He didn't even have a sister or brother, so he had a very good relationship with Hua Jinyao and the others. Sure Mingwan's condition really stumped him. Even if he was willing, his parents wouldn't agree. Wan Xianying had a headache now. Even if this was indeed Sure Mingwan's condition to make things difficult for him, he couldn't do it. Mingwan, what do you think? Let's each take a step back. Sure Mingwan looked at him, not understanding what he meant by taking a step back. If you're willing to agree to be with me, we can have 2 children. One will take your surname and the other will take my surname. How about that? Sure Mingwan looked at Wan Xianying. At a certain moment she was really touched. With Wan Xianying's family background and status, to be able to say such words was already a lot of sincerity. Wan Xianying, thank you. Sure Mingwan thanked him sincerely. Thank you so much. She didn't say more, but what else did Wan Xianying not understand? Yes, thank me, but you can't accept me. Right? Wan Xianying? Mengwan, tell me the truth. Wan Xianying thought of what he had seen in France and some of the things that happened later. Do you have someone in your heart? Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. When she met Wan Xianying's clear eyes, she hesitated for a second and quickly nodded. Yes, I have someone I like. Wan Xianying looked as if he had expected it. No wonder. The atmosphere was a little silent. Shi Mengwan didn't know what she could say. She stood there feeling a little awkward. It's fine. Wan Xianying was much calmer than her. I saw it a long time ago. Shi Mengwan's expression was strange. Wan Xianying smiled softly. If you don't have someone you like, why can't you see an outstanding man like me? Don't you think so? His words made the expression on Shi Mengwan's face relax a little. She chuckled. Because I'm blind. When she smiled, Wan Xianying also relaxed. There were some things that he didn't say after seeing through, but if he really said it, it would be better. All right. Then I hope you won't be blind for too long, Wan Xianying continued. Otherwise the fake blind will become really blind. After rejecting Shi Mengwan's suggestion to send him back, Wan Xianying walked out of the neighborhood and left. Shi Mengwan looked at his back view, and the corners of her lips pursed into a straight line again. After being entangled with Zhang Haoze for such a long time, she couldn't break it off and it was still messy. After going back and forth so many times, wasn't she just blind? It was just that she didn't feel like she could control her heart. Moreover, her feelings for Zhang Haoze weren't as simple as just being attracted to him. After more than a year of relying on each other, she had never forgotten the care and companionship she had once had. She shook her head and didn't let herself think of Zhang Haoze again. No matter how difficult some things were, she had to learn to let go. Shi Mengwan didn't see Zhang Haoze come looking for her that night, which made her feel relieved again. Her personality could be considered flamboyant, and her willpower could definitely be considered firm. However, all her rationality would become vulnerable in front of Zhang Haoze. Perhaps she needed to stay away for a while? Why not fly to Rong City for a few days after she was done with this job? Not only could she accompany Su Qingsang, but she could also avoid Zhang Haoze? Shi Mengwan had a good idea, but she didn't expect to see Zhang Haoze guarding the door the next morning when she opened the door to go to work. Seeing that it was him, Shi Mengwan subconsciously took a step back, but when she thought that she had to go to work, she took another step forward. This step back and forward allowed her to stand in front of Zhang Haoze. His tall stature made the entire door look extremely cramped. He also successfully blocked Shi Mengwan's way out. Zhang Haoze, please move aside. I want to go out. I bought you breakfast. Zhang Haoze acted as if he didn't see her cold face. You probably haven't had breakfast yet. Go to school after you eat. Shi Mengwan stared at the bag in Zhang Haoze's hand. The logo on it was a very famous Hong Kong-style breakfast restaurant in Lin City. Retracting her gaze, Shi Mengwan's hand clenched the bag tightly. No need, thank you. I've eaten. Please move aside. His stiff tone was an obvious rejection, but in Zhang Haoze's eyes, such a rejection wasn't thorough enough. He suddenly moved his face closer to Shi Mengwan. His sudden action startled Shi Mengwan, and her body naturally took a step back. Zhang Haoze used the hand that wasn't carrying breakfast to place on her waist to stabilize her body. At the same time, he continued to move forward in front of her. The tip of his nose gently swept past her lips, and finally, he hugged her waist and took a step forward. The two of them stood together in the room. Zhang Haoze hooked the tip of his foot and easily closed the door. Let's have breakfast. He raised the bag in his hand. Zhang Haoze. Shi Mengwan pulled his hand away and said angrily, I've eaten. You've eaten? Are you sure? There's nothing to be uncertain about. Zhang Haoze faced her and bent down again. Your mouth is full of the smell of toothpaste, but there's no taste of breakfast. He said such frivolous words with a serious expression, which made Shi Mengwan's face turn red. She bit her lip and pursed her lips tightly. After realizing what she had done, she loosened her grip a little. Zhang Haoze, are you all right? Even if I haven't eaten, what does it have to do with you? I can go to the studio to eat. Can you move aside now? Zhang Haoze didn't move aside. He grabbed her hand and led her to the dining table. He was much stronger than her. Shi Mengwan tried a few times but she couldn't break free. She could only let him pull her away. Zhang Haoze? Zhang Haoze placed the bag in his hand on the table, opened it and took out several lunch boxes from inside. He placed them out one by one. Let's eat. Shi Mengwan was finally able to break free from his hand when he placed the lunch boxes. She took a step back and stood about a meter away from Zhang Haoze. Jean Hausa, we've already broken up. If he didn't hear it clearly yesterday, she didn't mind saying it again today. Jean Hausa turned around and faced the coldness in her eyes. He took a step forward and stood in front of her. I didn't agree. I don't need your consent. She had already decided and wouldn't change it. Wanwan, do you have to do this? Jean Hausa, do you have to do this? Sure, Mingwan had a headache. She was really trying hard to control herself, and she was also trying hard to forget him. Why did he still have to appear? You go. Sure, Mingwan took a step back and pointed in the direction of the door. She didn't want this. She didn't like him coming and going as he pleased. If he couldn't afford the feeling she wanted, then he shouldn't provoke her anymore. Jean Hausa's brows furrowed tightly. Wanwan. He wanted to explain himself, but his phone rang again. He glanced at Shi Mengwan and picked up the phone. The news from the other end of the phone made his expression change. He glanced at Shi Mengwan with a serious expression. I'll be right there. After hanging up the phone, he put away his phone and looked at Shi Mengwan. I have something urgent to deal with. I have to go out now. No matter how unhappy you are, you still have to eat breakfast. After saying this, he resisted the urge to hug Shi Mengwan. Instead, he left in a hurry. Shi Mengwan looked at his back and felt the seriousness in his words just now. Although he hadn't appeared during this period of time, he had obviously lost some weight today. Jean Hausa's footsteps were a little fast, so fast that Shi Mengwan didn't even have time to ask him what had happened. However, her intuition told her that this matter wasn't ordinary. When the car stopped at the entrance of the first hospital, Tang Hua had already come out. When he saw Jean Hausa, he walked in front of him in a few steps. The car accident happened an hour ago. At that time, Miss Chen was about to go to work. Just as she was about to reach the Chen Corporation's building, a car rushed out from the corner and hit Miss Chen's car. Tang Hua said very clearly, I've already called the police and the car that caused the accident has been detained, but I think it's not ordinary. He didn't say the rest, but the meaning was quite clear. This accident wasn't an accident, but man-made. Jean Hausa didn't ask further and went straight into the hospital. When he went in, Qin Feifei was still being resuscitated. He couldn't ask how the doctor was doing. Not long after, Qin Yongchang also came. The moment he came for Jean Hausa. Without giving Jean Hausa a chance to speak, he directly waved his fist at him. However, before his fist could touch Jean Hausa had already taken a step back to avoid it. Qin Yongchang was very angry. He pointed his finger at Jean Hausa. Ungrateful. You're ungrateful. I want you to take good care of Feifei. Is this how you take care of her? It's fine if you don't show up, but as soon as you show up, you sent Feifei to the hospital? Uncle, don't call me that. I can't afford it. Qin Yongchang was really angry. Jean Hausa couldn't refute it, and he didn't intend to defend himself. He had already asked Tang Hua to investigate why such a thing happened. The specific situation would have to wait for Tang Hua to finish investigating. However, he didn't wait for Tang Hua to give the results of the investigation. Jean Hausa's phone rang again. There were a few photos on the screen. One was of Qin Feifei getting into a car accident this morning, and another was of him and Qin Feifei together. There was also a photo of Qin Feifei alone. 3 photos and a sentence. It's not over yet. Jean Hausa's heart skipped a beat. There was no need to wait for the results of the investigation. This was the work of the Jean family. He had thought that Jean Kuan and Uncle Qi might retaliate, but he didn't expect that the other party would actually target Qin Feifei. No, he shouldn't be surprised. This was more like their style of doing things. Jean Hausa held his phone with a solemn expression. He turned around and was about to leave, but was stopped by Qin Yongchang. Where are you going? Where else can you go? Let me tell you, I won't let this matter go just like that. You must give our Feifei an explanation. Jean Hausa was silent. He couldn't give him an explanation. The only thing he could do was to avenge Qin Feifei so that those blind people wouldn't come to his door to cause trouble. Uncle, don't worry. I will give you an explanation. This time, Jean Hausa wasn't in a hurry to leave. He waited outside the resuscitation room for Qin Feifei to wake up. After the doctor rescued her, he told them that Qin Feifei was out of danger. Now there was no problem for the time being. Jean Hausa heaved a sigh of relief. But he couldn't completely relax. Qin Feifei's injuries weren't serious. She would be fine after a few days of rest. In his opinion, this didn't seem like they were deliberately trying to kill Qin Feifei. Instead, it seemed like they were giving him a warning. Realizing this, Jean Hausa suddenly had a bad premonition. Soon he received a new text message on his phone. Do you feel relieved? Jean Hausa, Don't be happy too early. Do you think that just because you found a shield we won't know who you really want to protect? Zhang Hao's heart skipped a beat. He almost immediately thought of Shi Mengwan. With this thought he couldn't sit still anymore. He didn't care how long it would take for Chen Feifei to wake up. He hurriedly turned around to look for Shi Mengwan. Nothing could happen to Shi Mengwan. Along the way he kept urging the driver to drive faster. A little faster. His phone didn't ring again, but this kind of moment was even more torturous. His hand on his knee clenched tightly into a fist. He was still careless. He should have been more reliable. Shi Mengwan didn't eat the breakfast prepared by Zhang Hao, but she really wasn't a wasteful person. After thinking about it, she brought breakfast to the company and directly distributed it to the other people in the studio. But even so, she still felt that it wasn't enough. There was a ball of fire in her heart. That ball of fire made her want to burn Zhang Hao regardless of anything else. She was still thinking about how she should face Zhang Hao the next time he came, or whether she should use a more intense method. No matter what, she couldn't continue like this. Just as she made up her mind, she forced herself to divert her attention and stop thinking about Zhang Hao. On the other end, Zhang Hao suddenly rushed into her office. Xiaoji followed behind Zhang Hao and looked at her helplessly. Her expression was slightly conflicted. Sister Shi, I can't stop him. Zhang Hao heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Shi Mengwan was safe and sound. He went forward to hug her. He needed to confirm her safety, but Shi Mengwan suddenly raised her hand and placed it on his chest. Anger gradually appeared on her face again. Chapter 694. Shi Mengwan refused to be entangled like this. She needed to forget Zhang Hao in the shortest time possible, and not let him appear in front of her again and again. However, Zhang Hao acted as if he didn't notice the ugly expression on her face. He suddenly reached out and held her in his arms. Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. She wanted to push him away, but he hugged her very tightly. Zhang Hao's chin touched the top of Shi Mengwan's hair. Smelling the fragrance of her hair, he felt his mood slowly calm down. He tightened his grip on her waist. The feeling of worrying that something would happen to her made him lose his mind for a moment. Shi Mengwan didn't let him hug her for too long. She suddenly raised her elbow and slammed it hard into his chest. Zhang Hao wasn't prepared for her to attack him. He took 2 steps back and let go of her at the same time. Shi Mengwan took a deep breath. Her willpower really wasn't strong, especially every time she encountered something related to Zhang Hao. But this didn't mean that she was someone without a bottom line or principles. On the contrary, it was precisely because she had principles and bottom lines that she couldn't accept Zhang Hao's actions. Zhang Hao, do you have to do this? Did he have to use such a method to constantly get close to her and shake her willpower? Zhang Hao thought about Chen Feifei's car accident, and his brows furrowed tightly. Those explanations weren't easy to say, and he didn't want her to know about those worries. However, looking at Shi Mengwan's clueless expression, he hesitated again. He didn't speak, and Shi Mengwan didn't know what she could say, so she also remained silent. In the silence, the two of them faced each other. After a few minutes, Shi Mengwan finally couldn't stand the situation in front of her. She didn't want to speak anymore, nor did she look at Zhang Hao. She turned around and returned to her seat. She still had an order to finish. She wanted to finish it quickly so that she could go to Rong City to see Su Qingsang. Although she didn't lack people to take care of her now, and she was a doctor in the obstetrics and gynecology department, she still wanted to see her with her own eyes and make sure that she was safe. Just as her hand touched the mouse, Zhang Hao walked in front of her. He held her hand, making it impossible for her to continue for a while. Zhang Hao. Even if he was crazy, he should have had enough, right? Come with me to Qingqing. He wanted to go to Qing City to personally solve the problems of the Zhan family. Before that, he had to put her in front of him, under his eyes, before he could feel at ease. Shi Mengwan blinked. For a moment, she thought that the man in front of her was possessed. What did you say? Come with me to Qingqing. As if he was afraid that Shi Mengwan didn't understand, he didn't mind explaining more clearly. My father is from Qing City. My home is also in Qingqing. I want to take you back. Shi Mengwan looked at his hand that was holding hers and chuckled. You mean bring my parents? Zhang Hao frowned. He didn't mean that. In his heart, no one in the Zhan family was qualified to be the head of the family. You don't need to see them. In Zhang Hao's heart, they were just a group of unimportant people. In fact, between him and Zhang Kuan, it was a matter of life and death. Sure Mingwan misunderstood his meaning. She couldn't tell what she was thinking. The only thing she could be sure of was that Jean Hausa had never thought of bringing her to meet his family. Jean Hausa, you should go. I won't go to Qing City with you. She had heard from Sure Mingwan that Jean Hausa's father had married another woman and had a stepmother. She reckoned that it wasn't just a stepmother. The stepmother might have her own children. Under such circumstances, Jean Hausa's relationship with his family was definitely not good. She wouldn't really ask to see his family. However, Jean Hausa's words just now made her feel a little uncomfortable. Since he didn't want to bring her to Qing City to meet his family, why did he say that he wanted to bring her to Qing City? She pulled her hand back from Jean Hausa's hand. The wariness on Sure Mingwan's face was even more obvious than before. One. The expression on Jean Hausa's face became more and more conflicted. He wanted to mention it more or less, but he didn't know where to start. I still have something to do. If there's nothing else, President Jean, please leave. As she spoke, she focused her attention on the screen in front of her again. Jean Hausa was about to say something when his phone rang again. It was Tang Hua. He brought 2 pieces of news. Those 2 pieces of news made Jean Hausa's expression change slightly. After hanging up the phone, he looked at Sure Mingwan. She was staring at the screen intently. The mouse on her hand clicked a few times as if she wasn't affected by him at all. Jean Hausa couldn't say the rest of his words. One, I might be busy for a while. When I'm done, I'll come pick you up and take you to Qing City. No need. Sure Mingwan didn't even raise her head. I'm not interested. Her cold tone was full of resistance. Jean Hausa was helpless. Moreover, it was indeed a troubled time. He could only leave first. One, wait for me. I'll definitely come pick you up. At that time, if everything was settled, it would be easier to pick her up and take her to Qing City. Sure Mingwan acted as if she didn't hear him and was still focused on the work at hand. However, after Jean Hausa left, she put down the mouse and looked at an unknown point in the distance. No one knew what she was thinking. Jean Hausa left the office building. Tang Hua had already parked the car downstairs. He quickly got into the car. Tang Hua looked a little anxious. Boss, what do you think we should do about this? That old fart, Jean Kuan, actually issued a kill order for boss. Even though such a kill order was only issued within the Jean family. But what kind of family was the Jean family? In the early years, they relied on doing some unorthodox businesses to bring the Jean family to its current state. The Jean family had their own assassin hall. They might not be comparable to the top professional assassins in the world, but they were still quite powerful. All these years, Jean Kuan had used this assassin hall to get rid of many of his thorns. Now Jean Kuan had actually used such a kill order on him. It wasn't a warning, nor was it a warning. He really wanted his life. Jean Hausa's expression had a rare trace of seriousness. Previously he thought that Chen Feifei's injury was a warning to him, but now that he thought about it, it wasn't. Thinking back to what Uncle Chi said when he came looking for him last time, he seemed to understand a little. Whether it was the 2nd or 3rd generation of the Jean family, they didn't have a worthy successor. Jean Kuan was already old. It wouldn't be that easy for the Jean family to continue the glory of the past few decades. Uncle Chi was probably behind Jean Kuan's back and wanted him to take up the mantle of the Jean family. However, he didn't know that his hatred for the Jean family and Jean Kuan had already been carved into his bones. No matter what the Jean family did, he remained unmoved. Boss. He didn't say anything. Tang Hua was a little worried. Go back to Qing City. Jean Hausa quickly made a decision within a few seconds. Tang Hua wasn't surprised. But if we leave, what about Chen Feifei? Actually, he wanted to ask, what about Sure Mingwan? The people from the Jean family were just flustered for a moment. They weren't stupid. When they reacted, they would definitely understand that Chen Feifei was just a shield. She was useless at all. Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes as if he had thought of something. Let's go. We'll go to the hospital before returning to Qing City. No matter what, Chen Feifei's injury this time was because of him. After all, the Chen family had saved his life. He still had to give them an explanation. The weather in Qing City had already started to turn cold. Jean Hausa sat in the car and watched as the driver shook off the tail behind him for the 13th time. He glanced at the traffic behind him. Ahua, how's the old man doing recently? He's still hanging on by a thread. He had already suffered 2 strokes, and this stroke had brought about quite serious consequences. However, Jean Kuan was lucky. He didn't die even though he was like this. He still had time to deal with Jean Hausa? It was really because his previous movements were too light. Tell old 6 and old 7 to move faster. Although this was a little forceful, he had no other choice at this time. Tang Hua nodded in understanding. Okay, I believe that 6th and 7th brothers will arrange it well. Hopefully. Zhang Haoze hoped so, but he couldn't really let down his guard completely. In fact, the Zhang family had been operating in Qing City for decades. Their power was deeply rooted, and it really wasn't something that could be completely destroyed in a short period of time. He had underestimated his enemy before. But no matter what, he wouldn't stop, even if this process was more difficult than he had thought. Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes, his expression full of danger. Zhang Kun was a very subjective and very assertive person. In his heart, if there was someone who didn't do what he wanted, then it must be someone else's fault, not his. He never reflected on his own problems, so naturally, he wouldn't feel that it was his fault that the son he had taught was now reduced to a housewife with a woman. This was that woman's fault, it was that woman's problem. She was the one who seduced his son, and she was the one who made Zhang Lai become like this. Since Zhang Kun had been in a shady business back then, he wasn't just ordinarily ruthless. When he knew that that woman had caused his son to become like this, he had the intention to kill her. Towards that woman. He had to get rid of her. But at first he didn't find an opportunity to do so. Zhang Lai's maternal family seemed to know something, and they were still very protective of this grandson and his grandson's child. He didn't have a chance to do so for a while, but it didn't mean that he would never have a chance to do so. He decided to wait for a while, wait for a suitable opportunity, and then get rid of that woman. At first he didn't wait for an opportunity, which made him depressed. Later he didn't even hesitate to bring Zhang Ji and Min Quan to his side, thinking of nurturing them for a period of time. But with Zhang Lai in front of him, the other illegitimate children naturally couldn't satisfy Zhang Kun. The more dissatisfied he was, the more he hated Zhang Lai's wife. Later, Zhang Kun's opportunity finally came. Because of the change of power. Zhang Lai's maternal family had encountered some trouble. He couldn't care less about Zhang Lai for the time being. For Zhang Kun this was an opportunity. Previously, because he was worried about Zhang Lai's maternal family, he didn't make a move. Now that something had happened to Zhang Lai's maternal family, his opportunity had come. At this time, Zhang Lai and his wife had already been living outside for several years. The family of 3 lived the most ordinary life in another city. Zhang Kun, who saw the investigation information again, was still extremely angry. Because after so many years he hadn't picked out a child who could inherit his career. Zhang Lai, who could inherit his career, was bewitched by a woman. He couldn't tolerate it. Zhang Kun decided to get rid of that woman. Before getting rid of her, he went to the door with the last trace of father-son relationship. In the beginning, Zhang Kun decided to be polite before using force. If Zhang Lai was willing to go home with him obediently, then he could only kill that woman and let him bring that bastard home. But if Zhang Lai didn't listen to him, then don't blame him for being impolite. When Zhang Kun came to the door, Zhang Lai was naturally very surprised. He had no idea that his father had actually targeted him a few years ago. Zhang Lai was still happy to see his father. But that happiness didn't last long. Zhang Lai, you disappoint me too much. Ever since he was young, Zhang Kun, who had always been cold-blooded and indifferent, still put on such a face. Dad, don't call me. Zhang Kun was very angry. For a woman, where did you put the honor of the Zhang family in our family? Zhang Lai was silent. He had indeed let down Zhang Kun's nurturing. However, Dad, Ruoliu is a good woman. If you had really come into contact with her, you would definitely like her. Impossible. It's true. Zhang Lai was still too naive. At this time he was still trying to convince Shi Kun to accept his wife. Ruoliu is a very good woman. Dad, you really? Shut up. Zhang Kun glared at his son in front of him, wishing he could strangle him to death. However, the purpose of his visit today wasn't to argue with his son. Zhang Kun's face was cold. He took out a gun and threw it in front of Zhang Lai. Take it. Dad? Zhang Kun was shocked. He wasn't unfamiliar with guns, but after leaving the Zhang family, he hadn't touched one for many years. You're my son. You can't be so cowardly, right? Zhang Kun sneered. Don't say that I, your father, didn't give you a chance. What do you mean, Dad? Pick it up. Zhang Kun shouted. Zhang Lai hesitated for a moment, but in the end he still picked up the gun. That. Kill her? As Zhang Kun spoke, he pointed at Xiao Ruoliu, who had just come down from upstairs and had just settled her bad boy. That. Zhang Lai had been living too comfortably in the past few years. It was so comfortable that he had forgotten what the Zhang family relied on to make their fortune. He looked at the gun in his hand, then at Zhang Kun. In the end, as if he was throwing a hot potato, he threw the gun out and threw it on the coffee table. Dad, are you crazy? Jean-Li's expression was full of shock and accusation. I'll say. Jean-Cohen looked at his useless child and pushed the gun to Jean-Li's side again. Didn't you say that you wanted to go back to the Jean family? Since that's the case, then kill this woman. If she dies, you can go back to the Jean family. Dad. If you say that, I won't go back to the Jean family for the rest of my life. Chapter 695. Jean Hauser woke up from his dream with a start. The gunshot seemed to still be lingering in his ears. His head hurt a little. He rubbed his temples, but he couldn't suppress the headache no matter what. Ever since he returned to Qingqing, he couldn't restrain the nightmares from that day. Even if he wanted to resist, it would be useless. He got up and looked at the gloomy night sky outside. He took out his phone, unlocked it, and looked at Shi Mingwan's number on it. In the end, he didn't pull it out. At dawn, he woke up early and went to the gym downstairs to work out. He was used to getting up early. He had the habit of doing morning exercises every day. Not only morning exercises but also boxing. The security of Sakura Manor was quite good. Moreover, he had arranged many people to guard this villa, both openly and secretly. When he came out of the gym, the staff had already prepared breakfast. He finished reading the financial news while eating breakfast. As soon as he put down the bowl in his hand, Tang Hua entered the door with a rare solemn expression. Boss, something happened to sixth brother. Jean Hauser looked at Tang Hua with a malicious expression. What's going on? Speak clearly. Last time, you asked sixth brother to keep an eye on the club under the Jean family's name. You seem to have found a breakthrough. The day before yesterday he told me that he wanted to go in and take a look. But until today I haven't received any news from him. Tang Hua's face was a little anxious. This group of people had been together since they were young, so they were clear about their character. Boss, Old Six isn't someone who doesn't know what's important. If nothing had happened to him, no matter what, there would definitely be news. Now that there's been no news from him for an entire day, I'm afraid. Tang Hua didn't say it out loud, but he believed that Jean Hauser would understand. Jean Hauser was silent. He thought about Uncle Chi's words last time in the killing order. His expression was solemn. Have you searched? He knew about the clubhouse that Tang Hua was talking about. Previously, Old Six had said that he wanted to go and check it out. He knew that it wasn't going to be easy. He tried to stop Old Six, but he couldn't do so. I've tried, but there's no news yet. Jean Hauser's expression was solemn. He sat there with his brows tightly furrowed. The Jean family couldn't be dealt with in a day. After such a long time, he had slowly laid out his plans and slowly closed the net. Ever since he decided to go against the Jean family, he knew that this was a road full of thorns. No matter what, the Jean family was a family that had been accumulated for so many years. It was impossible to destroy them overnight. He had this understanding. However, this understanding did not include sacrificing the lives of those he regarded as his closest friends. Let Old Seven take some people to find out where Old Six is and bring him back. But, Tang Hua looked like he wanted to say something, but he hesitated. He didn't say what he didn't say, but Jean Hauser understood what he meant. If Old Seven brought people there and didn't manage to bring Old Six out, he might end up getting himself killed instead. If that was the case, then it really wasn't a good thing. Jean Hauser also realized that it was not appropriate to let seventh brother look for someone. Perhaps he should directly find a breakthrough point from the Jean family. His phone rang again. The person on the other end of the phone was Uncle Chi. I think we can meet now. I don't see any need to meet him. Jean Hauser had a very bad impression of Uncle Chi. Is that so? Uncle Chi smiled and said a name. Then he asked, Are you sure you don't want to see me? Jean Hauser's expression was ugly. He gripped the phone in his palm tightly and resisted the urge to throw it out. 2 hours later, Jean Hauser met Uncle Chi in the office of Qingqing Company. Uncle Chi's expression was much more smug than the last time he came. Jean Hauser was expressionless. Even if he was in a weak position, he wouldn't admit defeat in front of the Jean family. Uncle Chi wasn't in a hurry to speak. He slowly took out a few photos from his pocket and placed them on Jean Hauser's desk. In the photo, a man who looked to be less than 30 years old was tied to a chair. The man's body was obviously injured, as if he had been beaten. No matter how calm Jean Hauser was, his expression still changed slightly when he saw Old Six like this. But he quickly calmed down. He looked at Uncle Chi coldly. His slightly narrowed eyes were sinister and dangerous. Uncle Chi wasn't annoyed by his glare. He chuckled. How about we discuss a condition now? Jean Hausa frowned. His expression was very cold. I don't think there's anything to discuss between us. Why do you say that? I don't believe you don't know what the current situation is. Jean Hausa didn't answer him. Uncle Chi leaned forward slightly. I can guarantee that you won't be able to eat the Jean family in one go now. But if you're willing to take a step back, you can. Why don't you take a step back and we'll both be happy? If possible, Uncle Chi really didn't want to beg a junior like this. But he had no choice. Jean Yi, Jean Li, Jean Yang, and the others, ever since the last time, not only did they not unite as one, but they also caused more and more trouble. Jean Li's ability wasn't bad, but the Jean family had a big business. He hadn't taken on all the responsibilities in the past. There were many things that he couldn't make decisions about. He really didn't have Jean Kuen's demeanor back then. If it wasn't for the fact that Uncle Chi really couldn't find anyone, he wouldn't have put down his old face and come here to beg Jean Hausa. Jean Hausa curled up the corners of his lips. Take a step back? How? How about you take over the Jean family and let the Jean family become yours? Are you sure you can make the decision? Jean Kuen isn't dead yet. He really called Jean Kuen's name. His expression was full of ridicule without the slightest bit of respect. Uncle Chi wasn't angry. I don't believe that you don't know what kind of situation the old man is in now. So now I can make the decision. Uncle Chi had been by Jean Kuen's side for more than 30 years. In the Jean family he had absolute authority. He was also confident that as long as he was around, those people wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. Jean Hausa was silent. He didn't respond to Uncle Chi's words. Uncle Chi wasn't in a hurry either. He was extremely patient today, waiting for Jean Hausa to compromise. Tang Hua, who was standing beside Jean Hausa, looked at his conflicted face. His lips moved, but he wanted to say something, but he stopped. As if sensing his subordinate's thoughts, Jean Hausa picked up the stack of photos and looked at the complacency and certainty on Uncle Chi's face. He tore off the photos one by one. I refuse. You? Uncle Chi, who hadn't expected such an answer, was stunned on the spot. He was stunned for nearly a minute. When Jean Hausa asked Tang Hua to chase him away, he suddenly placed his hands on the desk. Jean Hausa, are you sure? There's nothing to be uncertain about. Sixth brother's life wouldn't be in danger for the time being. Uncle Chi was afraid that he would use extreme measures, so he didn't dare to hurt sixth brother for the time being. And he was confident that he could bring sixth brother out. Don't you want Lu Tao's life anymore? Lu Tao was referring to sixth brother. He's just a subordinate, but if you dare to hurt him, I will repay the Jean family 10 times, 100 times. Jean Hausa wasn't afraid of Uncle Chi's threat. You can try. Really? Uncle Chi sneered and took out a few more photos from his pocket. Yes, you're amazing. You don't care about Lu Tao's life, so don't you care about her life? This time it was a photo of Shi Mengwan on the desk. One of them was a photo of Shi Mengwan alone, while the second photo was of Jean Hausa and Shi Mengwan dancing on the dance floor together in France. Jean Hausa's gaze became sinister and dangerous. He almost couldn't help but stand up, but he quickly sat down again. If you dare to touch a single strand of her hair, do you believe that I will let you have a taste of what it's like to beg for death? Don't get agitated. Uncle Chi didn't care about his threat at all. If you're so agitated, we won't be able to calm down later, don't you think? Jean Hausa knew that he had lost control just now. He should have acted a little calmer. This kind of weakness being grasped in the hands of others made him feel very unhappy. What exactly do you want to do? Uncle Chi smiled. Stop all your revenge, go back to the Jean family and support the overall situation. Jean Hausa's expression was rather ugly. Uncle Chi wasn't in a hurry. He had been by Jean Kuen's side for 30 years and had walked step by step to where he was now in the Jean family. He wasn't someone to be trifled with. What if I refuse? I think you don't have a choice. Uncle Chi didn't mind telling the truth. Yes, you can also refuse, but I can't guarantee the lives of Mr. Liu and Miss Shi. Looking at Jean Hausa's gloomy face, Uncle Chi chuckled. Of course, you can also tie me up now and use me, an old fellow, to exchange hostages with the Jean family. However, I'm already so old. If I really die, I won't have any regrets. If the two of them really die with me, it'll be worth it. Don't you think so? Jean Hausa stared at Uncle Chi's face. He didn't restrain his aura at all. That pressure made even an experienced person like Uncle Chi tremble slightly. However, the more Jean Hausa acted like this, the more determined Uncle Chi was to let him return to the Jean family. Only such a person could support the Jean family. The atmosphere in the office was rather silent. Jean Hausa sat there without moving. Tang Hua, who was behind him, listened to him completely. Naturally, he wouldn't disturb him at such a time. He didn't speak, and Uncle Chi wasn't in a hurry. He didn't expect Zhang Haoze to agree immediately, but he was gambling. After all, he was the child of Zhang Lai and Xiao Ruoliu. Zhang Haoze was like Zhang Kuan but not like him. His methods were similar, but he was afraid that there was still a soft spot in his heart. And this soft spot was enough for Uncle Chi to make use of. 10 minutes later, Zhang Haoze finally said, "Okay, I agree. But I have a few conditions." "Speak." "First, this old man is old. Since his health isn't good, don't come out all the time. Rest well." This was to separate Zhang Kuan. Uncle Chi was a little hesitant, but in the end he nodded. Anyway, he was Zhang Kuan's spokesperson now. He would do what Zhang Kuan instructed. As long as he kept an eye on it, no one would cause trouble in front of Zhang Kuan. Okay. Second, I'll take over the Zhang family. I don't want to see the other Zhang family members. This is a little difficult. After all, they all have their own duties now. For the time being, they won't hinder you. If you don't agree, there's nothing to talk about. I'm that person's grandson. If you provoke me, at most we'll fight to the death. Okay. I agree. In any case, it wasn't much use for those idiots to stay in the Zhang family. It didn't matter if they stayed or not. Third, let my people go. Also, you have to promise that you'll never touch my people. You're not allowed to hurt them. No problem. Since you're willing to take over the Zhang family, you're my master. Not only will I get people to revoke the kill order against you, but I can also get people to protect the people you care about. Protect? What did this protection mean? Zhang Haoze couldn't be clearer. He looked at Uncle Chi coldly. Give me a week. I'll arrange things and enter the company. Okay. I'll wait for you for a week. Uncle Chi, who had received an affirmative answer, was very easy to talk to. If you think a week isn't enough, more time is fine. Uncle Chi left. Zhang Haoze sat on the chair and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Tang Hua asked worriedly, "Boss?" Zhang Haoze didn't look at him. He half closed his eyes and said softly, "Don't worry. I know what I'm doing." Shi Mingwan's life returned to peace. After that day, Zhang Haoze never came to look for her again. In the blink of an eye, another month passed. Su Qingsang's stomach was already big. She wanted to fly to Rong City to see her a few times, but she had too many things to do. The studio recruited 2 newcomers and slowly got the hang of it. However, many clothes were requested to be mass-produced on Weibo. Of course, it wouldn't be lacking in anything. But it was still lacking a little something. If she wanted to make it big, she had to mass-produce it. Shi Mingwan understood this logic. In the following time, she went to a few factories and a few raw material manufacturers. She was so busy that she had no time to care about her own matters. Mother Shi had probably guessed something. Ever since the last blind date was ruined, she didn't mention asking her to go on a blind date again. This way, Shi Mingwan was much quieter. That day she went to the last factory. It was already very late when she returned to the city. Although this section of the road had been repaired, there weren't many cars. Shi Mingwan drove halfway. She didn't know if it was because of stones or something else, but the car jolted. Shi Mingwan quickly reacted and gripped the steering wheel tightly. Finally, after stabilizing the car, she was about to continue driving. However, she realized that the car seemed to have broken down or something. It actually didn't move. She tried to start the car a few times but couldn't. After that, she quickly got out of the car to see what was wrong. If it didn't work, she could only call for a tow truck. Shi Mingwan got out of the car and opened the front cover. She didn't know much about the problem with the car. She only did this to see how to solve it. It was already late. She was alone in this place where there was no village or shop. Just thinking about it made her a little scared. She propped up the front cover of the car and checked it with the light of her phone. With her level, she couldn't find anything wrong with her car. After checking for a long time, Shi Mingwan really couldn't tell. Just as she was about to call for a tow truck, a voice came from behind her. "Miss, the car is broken. Do you want me to take a look at it for you?" Shi Mingwan was startled by the sudden sound. She turned around and saw a few young men in their early 20s surrounding her at some point in time. The one who spoke was a man in the lead. He was wearing a black jacket. He also seemed to think that he was handsome and shook his head. "Miss, come, let us examine you." Shi Mingwan swallowed her saliva. The situation in front of her didn't seem to be very good. "No need, I've already called for a tow truck." She held her phone and wanted to call the police without leaving a trace. However, the man in the lead took her phone away at this moment. "Miss, don't be so ungrateful. No matter what, we brothers have good intentions." As he spoke, he waved his hand behind him. Come you guys, give this beautiful lady a good examination. Under the night sky, Shi Mingwan's face was pale. She forced herself to calm down and reached out her hand to the man. Give me back my phone. I don't need you to examine me. Miss, maybe you'll need it later? The man in the black jacket smiled evilly. The few people he brought with him had already approached Shi Mingwan. Shi Mingwan was really scared this time. She was only one person, but the other party had 6. She pressed her body tightly against the front cover of the car, still thinking about how to escape. Suddenly, the sound of a car came from behind her. She turned her face, and the lights from the car shone on her face, causing her to narrow her eyes for a moment. The men in the black jacket weren't in a hurry to move. They thought that they would continue after the other party left. Unexpectedly, the car stopped beside them. It was also at this moment that the man in the black jacket saw it clearly. The other party wasn't a car. It was 5 cars. There were 2 Bentleys in front and 2 Bentleys in the back. The one in the middle was a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Even people without common sense were stunned when they saw this row of luxury cars. Not to mention hooligans like the yellow-haired man. Shi Mingwan also saw it clearly now. She saw many tall men in black suits getting out of the cars in front and behind her. Someone opened the back door of the Rolls-Royce, and a pair of extremely slender and powerful legs came out first. In the light of the car lights, the owner of the legs walked towards Shi Mingwan step by step. Shi Mingwan swallowed her saliva. Before she could react, the owner of the legs had already walked in front of her. The few young men were so scared that they didn't dare to speak. Zhang Haoze looked at Shi Mingwan and reached out his hand to her. Shi Mingwan didn't know what to think of, but she actually dodged and pulled her hand back. Not only that, she even took a step to the side. She forgot that there was someone beside her. As she stood there, she bumped into a hooligan standing beside her. This time, Shi Mingwan didn't have time to dodge. Her body moved to the side, but she lost her balance and fell to the side. Zhang Haoze's hand caught her waist in time. In the next second, she was carried horizontally. Pressing her head into his chest, Zhang Haoze gave the leader of the men in black a look. The man understood. The man in the black jacket realized that something was wrong, but it was too late to escape. Soon, waves of wailing and fighting sounds came from behind Zhang Haoze and the others. Shi Mingwan wanted to poke her head out to take a look, but she was already carried into the car by Zhang Haoze. Shi Mingwan and Zhang Haoze hadn't seen each other for almost 2 months. Sitting in the car, she didn't have time to look outside. She just looked at Zhang Haoze and sensitively realized that Zhang Haoze in front of her seemed to be different. Chapter 696. The car was very spacious and very quiet. Shi Mingwan took some time to recover from the frightening moment just now. Just now, she almost thought that she was going to. Retracting her thoughts, she looked at Zhang Haoze in front of her with complicated emotions. From when she was a young girl until now, every time she was in danger, he was the one who saved her. She couldn't say what she felt in her heart, but at this moment, her mood was very subtle. She couldn't think about anything else, so she just stared blankly at Zhang Haoze. Only then did she realize that the person in front of her seemed to be different. After not seeing him for nearly 2 months, Zhang Haoze's brows were still the same, but the expression revealed inside was very different. In the past, he was a little dark and arrogant. Looking at him now, his dark and arrogant demeanor was still there. But there was something else. The moment he got out of the car just now, his eyes were cold and his gaze was like a knife. It gave people the feeling that he was a sword that had finally been sharpened. This kind of superior aura made Shi Mingwan subconsciously swallow her saliva. The car was still parked. Shi Mingwan turned around and saw that the man in black who was in the lead outside the car window had already been beaten to the ground. The scene was a little bloody. Shi Mingwan turned around to look at Zhang Haoze. Is that enough? If they continued to fight, someone would probably die. Zhang Haoze glanced at her and didn't answer. She came out to talk about the factory today. She was wearing a casual suit and her long hair was tied into a ponytail. She looked much more beautiful and youthful. He picked up the ponytail behind her head and leaned over to sniff it gently. This action didn't contain much of an erotic feeling, but Shi Mingwan felt an inexplicable ambiguity, which made her very uncomfortable. It's really enough. She forced herself to focus on something else. Tell them to stop. Zhang Haoze still had her hair in his hand. He moved his face closer. Do you know what they wanted to do just now? Shi Mingwan's breathing tightened. Of course she knew. Just call the police. Zhang Haoze stared at her face for a long time and knocked on the car window. The people outside almost instantly stopped kicking and hitting. The The group of people stood beside the car in front and back. Shi Mingwan couldn't help but turn around to look at Zhang Haoze. This person had caused such a big scene. He was probably different now, wasn't he? She didn't have the chance to ask the question in her heart. Those people had already gotten into the car and the car started up again. She couldn't help but turn to look at him. The person in front of her still had the same face, but she felt a little unfamiliar. Zhang Haoze watched as her mind wandered. His lips moved forward and he was about to kiss her lips. Shi Mingwan subconsciously avoided it. Such an action made Zhang Haoze's eyes darken. He put his arm around her waist and grabbed her, not letting her leave. He lowered his head and kissed her without warning. Shi Mingwan didn't have time to escape. This time Zhang Haoze kissed her. The lights in the carriage were dim. Occasionally there was the reflection of the street lamp. His deep facial features could not be seen clearly at this moment. Oh. Shi Mingwan felt pain on her lips. He bit her. She stared at him. He stepped back but his hand was still on her waist. The distance between the two faces was less than 3 centimeters. The atmosphere in front of him was too intimate. Shi Mingwan wasn't used to it. At this moment he was at a loss for words. My car. It wasn't just the car. There was also her bag in the car. Don't worry, they will take care of it. His breath brushed against her face. Shi Mingwan was about to step back, but for some reason she closed her eyes. This way it seemed like she was inviting Zhang Haoze to kiss her. Zhang Haoze did as she wished and kissed her once again. Shi Mingwan looked at the 5 cars parked in front of her apartment and felt a headache coming on. She didn't understand why things had become like this again. She looked at Zhang Haoze speechlessly. Can you not be so ostentatious? She still had to live in this neighborhood in the future. If others saw Zhang Haoze's actions, what would they think? Zhang Haoze shook his head. The current situation was special. Although he made a deal with Uncle Qi and took over the Zhang family. But the Zhang family wasn't peaceful either. The current Zhang family was like a volcano under a calm surface that could erupt at any time. Whether it was Zhang Yi, Zhang Li, or Zhang Yang, none of them were convinced of him. In the past month or so they had been playing tricks behind his back. Zhang Haoze didn't take them seriously, but he wouldn't relax with the necessary defensive measures. Why are you still looking for me? Shi Mingwan was angry. I remember that we broke up. I also remember that I didn't agree. He wanted to get out of the car, but Shi Mingwan sat there and refused to get out. Zhang Haoze. Shi Mingwan felt tired every time she communicated with him. What do you take me for? What do you take me for? You appear whenever you want and disappear whenever you want. When you disappeared there was no news at all. When you appeared, you insisted on me cooperating with your performance. What kind of logic is this? Her face was expressionless. The emotions that had arisen when she saw him had all turned into calmness. Zhang Haoze looked at her and suddenly reached out to hug her. I'm sorry. Shi Mingwan's body stiffened, but Zhang Haoze acted as if he didn't feel it. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have disappeared and appeared whenever I wanted. But if you're unhappy, I can promise you that I won't do this in the future. Shi Mingwan didn't know how to react to this sudden apology. But she quickly remembered that this was the second time Zhang Haoze had apologized. Last time he also said he was sorry, but what happened in the end? It wasn't that Shi Mingwan didn't love him, but she didn't want to believe him anymore. The price of believing him was too high. She realized that she couldn't afford it. Zhang Haoze. She should be happy that such a person made such a promise at such a time, but she really couldn't be happy. Do you know? She looked at her fingertips and lowered her eyes. Her expression couldn't be seen clearly. I don't dare to believe your promise anymore. You might not know, but I'm very tired when I'm with you. I often wonder if I did something wrong. I often wonder what you're doing in places that I don't know about. Will those things be dangerous? Zhang Haoze. Shi Mingwan finally looked up at him and met his eyes. It's too tiring to be with you. I don't want to be tired anymore. As she spoke, she pushed open the car door and got out. She turned around and went into the apartment. Zhang Haoze got out of the car and waved his hand. Although the leader didn't agree, the 5 cars drove away together. Zhang Haoze slowed down and followed behind Shi Mingwan. Shi Mingwan quickened her pace, and Zhang Haoze followed behind her. When they reached the elevator, she wanted to tell him to stop following her, but this wasn't her home, so she endured it. Zhang Haoze didn't seem to notice the disgust in her eyes at all and just followed behind her. They entered the elevator and went upstairs. Shi Mingwan was silent all the way, so he followed her all the way. It wasn't until they stood at the door that Shi Mingwan finally couldn't help but turn around and glare at him. Mr. Zhang, don't you have anywhere to go? Shi Mingwan's tone wasn't very good. I believe that with your current status, you should have your own place in Lin City, right? Even if you don't, I believe that Miss Chen would be happy to take you in, so I really don't understand why you keep following me. Zhang Haoze looked at the anger on her face. This was her, right? She was lively and full of life. There was an almost imperceptible smile in his eyes. He leaned forward and placed one hand on the door behind her. I do have a place to stay. His face was almost pressed against her face and his voice was low and seductive. But I just want to be by your side. This person's words of love were really deadly. Shi Mingwan's body was already tightly pressed against the door behind her. A man's lust would lead people astray. This was really true. The Zhang Haoze in front of her could be considered a male version of Daji to her. Shi Mingwan never thought that she would hear Zhang Haoze confess like this one day. Looking at his face, she was a little confused. You? Before she could finish the word you, the door behind her opened with a ka. Shi Mingwan was stunned when she almost fell back. She had just steadied herself when she remembered that her bag was still in the car, so she didn't bring the key. Then, she lowered her head and saw Zhang Haoze open the door with the key. Her lips opened and closed again. You? Didn't she ask him to return the key to her? Why did he still have it? When Zhang Haoze opened the door, he used his other hand to hold her waist. He brought her in and closed the door. Zhang Haoze. Shi Mingwan reached out her hand. Return the key. 1-1. Zhang Haoze picked her up and held her body firmly in his arms. I miss you so much. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. Don't you miss me? Who wants to miss you? Shi Mingwan went to pull his hand. Zhang Haoze restrained her hand behind her back. Don't you miss me? I don't want to. Zhang Haoze kissed her on the lips. Do you want to? Who would miss you? Get out of the way. Zhang Haoze remembered again. Do you want to? I said, I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to. Zhang Haoze stopped fooling around. I really don't miss you. Her voice rose a notch and her face was flushed with anger. Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes slightly and suddenly carried her horizontally. Since you say you don't want to, then it proves that I've done too little before. It looks like I have to do something to make you remember it often. Zhang Haoze, you're shameless. Zhang Haoze wasn't angry when he heard this. Instead, he leaned his face close to her ear. Yes, I'll do something even more shameless later. Do you believe me? In terms of being a hooligan, how could Shi Mingwan be his match? Her body was placed on the bed. When she tried to get up, he piled on top of her and pressed her down. If she pushed him, he would have the ability to make her unable to move. The moment her hand was tied by his tie, Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth. You're raping me. Is that so? Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes. Since you said that, I can only think of a way to make you willingly be raped by me. Shi Mingwan didn't understand what Zhang Haoze meant. However, when she was teased by him like a kitten and begged for mercy time and time again, she realized that this was really more shameful than being willing to do it. When Shi Mingwan was half awake and half dreaming, she felt herself being gently carried into the bathroom by Zhang Haoze. There was no bathtub, so she was carried by him the entire time. After he was done, he carefully dried her dry and carried her out again. He gently placed her on the bed. He took the hairdryer to dry her hair, then pulled up the blanket to cover her body. Shi Mingwan was about to fall asleep, so her body was very tired and sore. So much so that when she saw Zhang Haoze like this, not only did she not feel touched, but she felt angry instead. Master. She was angry. Zhang Haoze, can you not be like a stallion in heat every time? Zhang Haoze frowned because of her description. As if he had thought of something, he wrapped her hand in his arms. Sorry, I can't help it. He gently kissed her earlobe and felt her trembling slightly because of his action. He silently curled his lips and his eyes were filled with joy. My self-control is very poor after meeting you. It was clearly his problem, so why was he blaming her now? Shi Mingwan didn't want to talk to him and she was very sleepy. She pretended not to hear what Zhang Haoze said. She closed her eyes and wanted to sleep, but Zhang Haoze didn't allow it. He kissed her on the cheek again. 1-1, come with me to Qing City. Shi Mingwan didn't even bother to answer. She didn't want to talk to him at all. I want you to stay by my side. Most importantly, other than those restless cousins, there was also Uncle Chi. He didn't trust anyone. He had to keep her under his nose. Only when he personally watched her and protected her would he be at ease. No. Shi Mingwan refused and turned her back to him. Zhang Haoze, I'm not going anywhere. She used her posture to show her resistance. Jean Hauser looked at the back of her head and hooked her into his arms with his big hand. He lowered his head and gently kissed the top of her head. Sleep. If there was anything, he would talk about it after she woke up. Yesterday, Shi Mingwan would rather believe that she was dreaming. In her dream, Jean Hauser saved her, and in her dream, Jean Hauser followed her home. Then the two of them messed around again. She shook her head. This kind of dream wasn't good. It was a nightmare for her. But she didn't expect that when she opened her eyes, Jean Hauser was still there. Just like before, the dining table was filled with breakfast. Jean Hauser sat at the dining table. When he saw her get up, he reached out his hand to her. Eat. After yesterday, Shi Mingwan didn't want to argue with Jean Hauser over such a small matter. If there was anything, she could wait until she finished her breakfast, and then she could slowly talk to him. I'm going out later. After breakfast, without waiting for Shi Mingwan to lay her cards on the table, Jean Hauser took the initiative to explain his whereabouts. There are some things at the company that I need to deal with. I'll probably be in Lin City for the next few days. You can also pack your luggage and come with me to Qing City when you're ready. When Shi Mingwan heard this, she put down the milk in her hand. Jean Hauser, I don't think I promised you that I would go to Qing City, right? Wanwan stopped fooling around. Jean Hauser wanted to hold her hand, but Shi Mingwan didn't give him the chance. She stood up. Jean Hauser, didn't you come all the way here just to do what happened last night? You've done it now and your goal has been achieved. You can leave now. 1-1. As for me, I'll never go to Qing City. Give up on that thought. After saying this, she turned around and went back to her room to change her clothes and prepare for work. After taking a few steps, she could feel a certain feeling coming from a certain part of her body. She gritted her teeth and turned around to glare at Jean Hauser. Would she accompany such a person to Qing City? She wouldn't serve him anymore. He would go wherever he wanted to go. Jean Hauser sat there without moving. Looking at her figure, the corners of his lips curled up even higher. Jean Hauser looked at Qin Yongchang in front of him expressionlessly. Qin Yongchang, who was used to liking him in front of him, was completely silent at this moment. There was a hint of flattery in the silence. After a long silence, it was Qin Yongchang who spoke first. Hauser, you haven't been paying much attention to the company these few months. Jean Hauser was silent. He wanted to send Shi Mingwan to the studio in the morning, but he didn't expect to receive a call from Qin Yongchang. He didn't know how he found out about his return to Lin City, so he came looking for him early in the morning. Jean Hauser didn't intend to be too ruthless towards Qin Yongchang. However, this didn't mean that he was a soft persimmon that could be bullied by anyone. Don't you have uncle to deal with the company's matters? I thought you wouldn't want to see me interfere too much. Look at what you're saying. No matter what, you and Fei Fei are childhood sweethearts and engaged fiancés. Isn't it normal for you to interfere in the Chen family's business? Uncle, it's better to be careful with your words. I remember that I've already made it clear to Fei Fei that we've already broken off the engagement. Uncle, if you continue to say that, it will affect Fei Fei's reputation outside. Qin Yongchang looked at Jean Hauser. Even he couldn't help but want to curse. If you really knew that it would affect Fei Fei's reputation, you shouldn't have cancelled the engagement. Hauser, look at what you're saying. Fei Fei is sincere to you. You can't let her down like this, can you? Qin Yongchang endured his unhappiness and once again played the emotional card. He said how they saved Jean Hauser back then. If it weren't for them, Jean Hauser would have died on the streets by now. If Jean Hauser was a person with a conscience, he wouldn't have declined and taken over the Qin Corporation's business. In the past 2 months, Qin Yongchang really felt uncomfortable. When Jean Hauser was in Lin City, he didn't do anything. However, the company's performance had been thriving. Many cases that seemed difficult to solve at that time became easy in Jean Hauser's hands. Ever since he wasn't around for the past 2 months, although the Qin Corporation didn't have any major problems, Qin Yongchang found it more and more difficult. He also understood more and more about Jean Hauser's role and methods. Jean Hauser sat still and patiently waited for Qin Yongchang to finish talking about the past. He supported his chin with one hand. Then, Uncle Qin, what do you want me to do? He didn't call him uncle anymore. Instead, he added his surname. The alienation was already very obvious. Qin Yongchang didn't hear it. Look at what you're saying. Of course, you're going to re-enter the Qin Corporation and take over your original business. Jean Hauser wasn't in a hurry to speak. He just looked at Qin Yongchang and stared straight at his face. He couldn't take it anymore. What did he mean? He finally spoke. Go to the Chin Corporation and take over the Chin Corporation's business. Then, wait for me to make the Chin Corporation bigger and stronger, and then let the real ideal person in your heart take over your business, right? Hausa, what nonsense are you talking about? Is it nonsense? Jean Hausa didn't think so. He stared at Qin Yongchang's face, took out a photo from the drawer, and pushed the photo in front of Qin Yongchang. Seeing the photo, Qin Yongchang's eyes widened. Where did you get this photo? No, how did you know? He did this very secretly and no one knew about it. Other than a trusted aide who had followed him for many years and took care of him from time to time, no one else knew about this matter, let alone others. Jean Hausa looked at Qin Yongchang with a hint of mockery in his eyes. Uncle probably doesn't know, but I don't like to fight battles that I'm not confident in. Since you want me to return to the Qin Corporation, support the Qin Corporation again, and bring it to glory, then I have to make sure what benefits I can get from this place. Right? If there's no benefit, why waste my time? But I didn't expect that the matter that Uncle arranged for me not only didn't have any benefits, but also dug such a big pit for me to jump into. He didn't say anything else. Qin Yongchang became anxious. Jean Hausa, what do you mean? You, Uncle. Jean Hausa picked up the photo with an appreciative look in his eyes. When he put it down, his gaze became quite sharp. Making wedding dresses for others is not a good thing. Maybe there are saints who like it, but I don't. Hausa, not to mention I've already told Feifei that we're going to cancel the wedding. Feifei is a very smart girl. She just didn't understand it for a while. After a long time, she will know that her feelings are just the infatuation of a little girl who doesn't understand love. But Uncle, you're different. Jean Hausa's voice was filled with mockery, and every word seemed to hit Qin Yongchang's heart. Uncle, you've doted on Feifei for so many years. You made Feifei think that she was the happiest little princess in the world. But I think she probably never dreamed that she, the Qin family's proudest little princess, wasn't the only one. Because her father, who has always doted on her, had an illegitimate child outside. Jean Hausa. Qin Yongchang couldn't take it anymore. That's enough. Shut up. Don't say any more. Feifei's health isn't good. You don't want her to be agitated. However, you don't want these assets to fall into the hands of others, so you came to me. Because with me, who owes the Qin family a favor, you can ignore me and treat me as a sacrifice. You can use me to make money for you. You can use me to bring the Qin family to the top again. And you, once the Qin family reaches the height you want again, you will think of him as a gift to that bastard of yours who is out there. And poor Feifei, she was sacrificed by you just like that. Jean Hausa's words were very soft. Qin Yongchang's expression was ugly. He wanted to slap the table and scold Jean Hausa for talking nonsense. But at this moment the office door was opened with a bang. Chapter 697. Qin Feifei's face was pale, and there was sweat on her forehead. She had always been in poor health. At this time she had one hand on the wall and the other on her heart. She gasped, looking at the two people in front of her, wishing for a moment that she could faint. But her body, which had always been weak, showed no signs of fainting. She looked at Qin Yongchang and then at Jean Hausa. His gaze was filled with accusation and accusation. You guys, Feifei? Qin Yongchang's expression changed. But only for a while. There were some things that his daughter would find out sooner or later. Dad. Qin Nan panted and walked step by step towards the two people sitting. Is what Brother Hao said true? Even though Qin Yongchang was used to seeing great storms, he still felt a little guilty when he met his daughter's eyes. He didn't say anything. Qin Feifei turned to Jean Hausa for an answer. Brother Hao, you wouldn't lie to me, would you? Tell me, is what you just said true? Her face was full of disbelief, but there was still the photo on Jean Hausa's desk. Qin Feifei snatched it over and looked at the person in the photo. Needless to say, there was no need to ask any more. He was a very young man who looked like he was still in university. He looked 50% similar to Qin Yongchang. It was just that he was younger and more flamboyant. Qin Feifei felt an unbearable pain in her heart. She thought she would faint again, but she didn't. She put her hands on the desk and stood firm. She stared at Jean Hausa's face and stubbornly asked for an answer. Jean Hausa's gaze fell on the photo in her hand. He looked up at Qin Feifei. This person wasn't Shi Mengwan. She was weak and sensitive. She could not bear the impending unveiling of the true would I. Haven't you already seen the photos? Without saying anything more, Qin Feifei staggered and almost fell. She looked at Qin Yongchang again. She suddenly threw the photo away and grabbed Qin Yongchang's shoulder. Dad. Why are you doing this? Didn't you say so? You said I was your little princess. You said I was your only daughter. Didn't you say so? You said that everything in the Qin family will be mine in the future. What? What? She asked several questions in a row, insisting on an answer. Qin Yongchang was shaken by her, but he didn't look at her. After Qin Feifei finished shaking, she started to hit Qin Yongchang. How can you do this? How could you do this? Didn't you say that you loved my mother the most? Didn't you say that you would never marry again after she left? Then who was he? Why does he still exist? Dad, how can you face my mom like this? How could you let me down? Dad, how could you do this? Qin Feifei's health was not very good. She did not have much strength at all. As he fought and cried, he went limp. This time she really fainted. Qin Yongchang's expression finally changed. He quickly picked up Qin Feifei. He just didn't know if it was because he was anxious or something else. When he got up, he loosened his grip and almost dropped Qin Feifei. Zhang Haoze had been watching coldly from the sidelines. Seeing this, he finally made a move. He stepped forward, picked up Qin Feifei and walked out. Qin Yongchang followed behind him. His voice was sharp and cold. Zhang Haoze, you're too ruthless. You called Feifei here, right? You did it on purpose, didn't you? Zhang Haoze did not answer his question, but he did not deny it either. Qin Yongchang was furious. All right. You're ruthless. That was a beautiful move of yours. Uncle, don't be angry. Zhang Haoze carried Qin Feifei into the elevator. Looking at Qin Yongchang, who was flustered and exasperated, the corners of his lips curled up into a cold smile. According to your plan, it's only a matter of time. You had this plan for a long time. I was just helping you advance it. You? Qin Yongchang was speechless. Of course he did not want to reveal it now. At the very least, he had to wait until they got married. At that time, Zhang Haoze would not ignore Qin Feifei. Don't think that you can get away with it. Let me tell you, Feifei is your responsibility. Zhang Haoze did not say anything. He carried Qin Feifei downstairs. The car was already waiting downstairs just like before. Qin Yongchang looked at the group of people and swallowed the words he wanted to curse. In the end, he got into the car with a toothache. After the rescue, Qin Feifei finally woke up. After she woke up, she didn't want to see Qin Yongchang. She chased Qin Yongchang out, but let Zhang Haoze stay alone. The ward was very quiet. Qin Feifei had already smelled enough of the disinfectant since she was young. She was also tired of smelling it. But because her body was not healthy enough, she had to do it from time to time. She stared out of the window in a daze for a full 10 minutes. She didn't speak and Zhang Haoze didn't speak either. The game had already begun. The engagement had to be broken. In fact, the existence of this engagement was not approved by him. Since it was a mistake, of course he had to correct it. He had patience now. Qin Feifei looked at the setting sun outside. She finally retracted her gaze and faced Zhang Haoze. When did you know? Zhang Haoze didn't expect her to ask this. He didn't intend to lie to her. A long time ago. How long ago is a long time ago? When you were 18. At that time, Qin Yongchang had already started to let him enter the company and take over some matters. He knew that Qin Yongchang wanted to groom him as a son-in-law. But later he subtly discovered some differences. Especially after the Qin Corporation went through that danger, it was clearly caused by Qin Yongchang's distrust of him. Although he turned the tide later and reduced the losses, he also successfully let the Qin Corporation fight a beautiful turnaround. But the seed of doubt was planted in his heart. If Qin Yongchang really wanted him to treat Qin Feifei well, or marry Qin Feifei in the future, and take care of the Qin Corporation well, he shouldn't have such an attitude. Although he wanted to solve the Zhan family's matter at that time, he wasn't completely unprepared. After investigating for a while, he found out the reason from many clues. After knowing it, it was much simpler. On the surface, Qin Yongchang was indeed a good father and husband. But deep down he had some traditions. He wanted his son to inherit the family business. His kindness to Qin Feifei was real. But his kindness came with conditions. And all of this was seen through by Zhang Haoze. So early? Qin Feifei's eyes widened. After understanding the key point, she didn't care about how Zhang Haoze found out. There was only one thought in her mind. Brother Hao, you really don't like me, do you? If he liked her a little, he wouldn't treat her like this. Zhang Haoze was silent. He thought for a moment and told the truth. In my heart, you're my sister. Sister? Qin Feifei smiled bitterly, her eyes full of mockery. Yes, I'm your sister, so you don't have to feel sorry for me. You don't have to pity me. You asked me to your company and let me hear such a cruel truth. Brother Hao, you're so cruel. Jean Hausa didn't deny it. Qin Feifei took a deep breath and calmed herself down. Why did you do this? Just to break off the engagement with me? Yes. He knew Shi Mengwan's heart not. If he wanted Qin Feifei to publicly break off the engagement in front of everyone in Lin City, he had to make Qin Feifei stand up. The current situation was that Shi Mengwan didn't believe his words. But if Qin Feifei stood up, Shi Mengwan would believe it. Qin Feifei's lips were pursed into a straight line. Her pale face and red eyes would make any man feel pity for her. Brother Hao, do you have a woman you like? Jean Hausa pursed his lips slightly and didn't deny it. Qin Feifei smiled. She seemed to have grown up in an instant and suddenly understood many things. You have someone you like, so you don't like me. The person you like might have misunderstood our relationship, so you want me to explain, right? She looked at Jean Hausa and knew that her guess was true. She smiled bitterly with a bitter expression. A girl who can make you care about her like this must be very beautiful, right? Yes. Jean Hausa nodded. In my heart, she's the most beautiful. The generous praise made Qin Feifei's face turn even paler. She bit her lip and her fingertips trembled. What do you want me to do? You'll announce the news of our breaking off the engagement. You can find any reason. I don't mind. In other words, Qin Feifei could be the reasonable one. She could make up any reason. She looked up at Jean Hausa. Aren't you afraid that if I say you're bad, the girl you like won't like you? No. Jean Hausa's voice was very soft. He thought of Shi Mengwan. No matter what I am, she will like me. Qin Feifei clenched her fists tightly to control herself from crying. Jean Hausa's gentle tone when he talked about that woman was something he had never used on her before. What if I don't agree? You will agree. Jean Hausa looked at her fixedly. Because you're a smart girl. Qin Feifei smiled. Brother Hao, do you know? This is the first time you've praised me. But I'm not happy at all. Jean Hausa was still silent. He did have sibling feelings for Qin Feifei. There was also gratitude. But that was all. Brother Hao, I will agree to you. But I also hope that you can agree to 2 conditions. Qin Feifei's expression seemed to have changed. She was much calmer than before. Don't worry, just 2. And I won't make things difficult for you. Go ahead. Qin Feifei stared at her fingernails. In the shortest time possible, many thoughts had already flashed through her mind. Everything that happened today was a huge blow to her. If possible, she really hoped that she was still the happy little princess of the Chen family. But now, she knew that she couldn't be that carefree little princess anymore. First, I can't agree to break off the engagement with you immediately. Give me some time. Jean Hausa frowned. Qin Feifei looked at him. Brother Hao, if I stand up right now and say that I'll break off the engagement with you, it will be very bad for the company. I need to use your name. 3 months. 3 months was the limit of his patience. Qin Feifei looked at him deeply and finally nodded. Okay, 3 months. The second thing is that I haven't completely mastered the company yet. I also know that I won't be able to master it very quickly in a short period of time. I hope that you can help me, Brother Hao. It doesn't matter if it's you or if you find someone. I don't want the company to fall into the hands of unrelated people. When Qin Feifei said that she didn't want to do it, a flash of gloominess flashed across her face. It was true that the Qin Corporation belonged to Qin Yongchang, but without her mother's power and help, Qin Yongchang wouldn't have been able to develop the company to its current state. The company belonged to Qin Yongchang, and it was also her mother's. She didn't want outsiders to get involved in any way. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. Brother Hao, I know you can do it, right? Jean Hausa looked at Qin Feifei. No matter what, they had grown up together. The change in Qin Feifei in front of him was unexpected, but it seemed to be reasonable. After all, after such a major change, it would really be abnormal if the person in front of him was still the same as before. I can. Thank you, Brother Hao. Qin Feifei smiled at him gratefully. There's one more thing. Qin Feifei seemed to realize that she had more than 3 conditions. Her expression was a little awkward, but Jean Hausa didn't mind. Go ahead. Qin Feifei bit her lip. Her expression was conflicted, painful, hesitant, but in the end it was firm. My father, he's getting old. I think he needs a good rest. Tell me, as his daughter, if I send him to a place with a good environment to spend the rest of his life, others won't be able to accuse me of being unfilial, right? When Jean Hausa heard this, the corners of his lips curled up slightly. Look, this was Qin Feifei. No matter how weak she looked on the outside, she was actually a person with a clear goal inside. He was not surprised or shocked that she had such a thought. Of course. Jean Hausa nodded. Feifei, you're so attentive. Others will only say that you're a good daughter and a very filial daughter. Qin Feifei seemed to heave a sigh of relief. Yes, I'm a good daughter. There was a hint of bitterness in her words as well as something else. Jean Hausa didn't care anymore. He stood up. It was getting late and he still wanted to go back and have dinner with Shi Mengwan. You decide the location. After you decide, I'll be responsible for sending uncle to recuperate. Qin Feifei nodded. The moment Jean Hausa turned around, she called out to him again. Brother Hao. Jean Hausa turned around. Qin Feifei gritted her teeth as if she was going all out. Since my father is going to retire, someone has to take care of him. Someone has to take care of him, and my cheap little brother should be the most suitable candidate. Right? She blinked her big eyes and looked at Jean Hausa. At this moment she didn't pretend at all. Jean Hausa smiled. This was a rare smile that he showed in front of Qin Feifei. Of course. No one is more suitable than him. Qin Feifei seemed to be relieved. She looked up at Jean Hausa and reached out her hand to him. Brother Hao, can you hug me? Just treat it as your final farewell. Jean Hausa looked at her and gently put his arm around her shoulder. Just as he was about to step back, Qin Feifei suddenly tightened her arms. He felt her trembling. She buried her face in his chest. Brother Hao, I'm really jealous of her. After saying this, she let go of her hand and turned her face away. Brother Hao, you should go quickly. Otherwise I'll regret it. Jean Hausa looked at Qin Feifei. He had watched her grow up. Feifei, take care of yourself in the future. I believe that the Qin family will definitely flourish in your hands. Of course. Qin Feifei didn't turn her head, but her eyes were much more determined than when she first woke up. In the past she only wanted to be in love, but now she knew. What love? It's all fake. If even someone close to you could betray you, what else was real? Only the benefits that were in his hands were real. Jean Hausa left the ward. As soon as he left, Qin Yongchang came over. What did Feifei say to you? How is she? Qin Yongchang looked in the direction of the ward. He wanted to get closer just now, but he was stopped by Jean Hausa's bodyguard. Jean Hausa glanced at Qin Yongchang. Thinking of Qin Feifei's request just now, he felt a little sympathy for Qin Yongchang. In some ways, Qin Feifei was the same kind of person as him. This was also the reason why he could never fall in love with Qin Feifei. Even though he had been with Qin Feifei for more than 10 years. Uncle Qin, go and see Feifei. As for what I said to her, let her tell you herself. Jean Hausa wasn't in the mood to stay any longer. This time, when he returned to Lin City, the matter in front of him was his first priority. Now that it was resolved, his footsteps were a little lighter. After getting into the car, the driver didn't need to ask. He drove directly to Shi Mengwan's apartment. When he entered, he smelled the aroma of food in the room. That familiar smell and familiar environment made Jean Hausa's expression relax for an instant. He changed his shoes and went straight into the kitchen. Shi Mengwan had already cooked a dish. Just as she took it out and placed it on the cooking table, she felt her waist being hugged. She was shocked and the pot in her hand almost fell to the ground. Jean Hausa reached out to help her hold it steady, then put it back on the stove. She turned around and glared at him. Don't you know how to make a sound when you walk? You scared me to death, don't you know? Sorry. Jean Hausa pecked her lips. I scared you. Shi Mengwan looked at him and felt that he seemed especially happy today. Are you happy that you scared me? No. Jean Hausa couldn't help but peck her lips again. Shi Mengwan reached out and pressed against his chest when he wanted to deepen his kiss. That's enough. I still have to cook. Get out of the way. Don't disturb me. Jean Hausa didn't let go. Instead, he glanced at the cooking table. What else do you want to cook? Stir-fried beef, and this, spicy and sour shredded potatoes. Shi Mengwan glanced at him as she spoke. Her voice was very soft. I only know how to cook some home-cooked dishes. If you don't like it, you can eat outside. Jean Hausa glanced at her. It was rare to see her so cute. He reached out and rubbed the top of her hair. Go and rest. I'll do it. Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. She watched as Jean Hausa took off his suit jacket, then unbuttoned the sleeves of his shirt and rolled them up twice. You know how to cook. Shi Mengwan's voice was a little trembling. That wasn't possible, right? She had never seen him cook before, so she thought that he didn't know how to cook. Now that he looked like he was about to make a move, he stood there a little nervously, obviously worried. You don't believe me? Chapter 698. Shi Mingwan looked at the handsome face in front of her and nodded without giving him any face. Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes when he heard her words. His gaze was too dangerous. Shi Mingwan wanted to retreat, but it was already too late. Zhang Haoze pulled her back into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her until her hands and feet went soft. He pressed his forehead against hers and his voice was a little hoarse. All right, let's go outside. I'll cook the remaining 2 dishes. Shi Mingwan's legs were a little soft. She leaned against the wall and looked at Zhang Haoze. She felt that he was a little different. He pushed her gently. Go. I'll call you later. Even if Shi Mingwan didn't believe him, she could only go out now. She wiped the dining table and went into the kitchen again. She saw that Zhang Haoze was really cooking. Are you that worried? Shi Mingwan didn't dare to answer Zhang Haoze's question anymore. She took the bowl and chopsticks and quickly left. She had just put it away. Coincidentally, she received a call. A client had some ideas about the design. Shi Mingwan listened patiently and then wrote them down. After she had made an appointment with the client, she was done. When she turned around, Zhang Haoze had already come out of the kitchen. He was holding 2 dishes in his hand. After putting them away, he looked at her. Come, let's eat. Shi Mingwan looked at him suspiciously. She took a few steps forward and looked at the dishes on the table. She bought onions to stir-fry beef today. This dish looked simple, but it wasn't easy to make. Beef was a relatively difficult dish to make. If the heat wasn't right, the beef wouldn't be cooked and the taste wouldn't be good. If the heat was too hot, the beef would be overcooked and it wouldn't taste good. Shi Mingwan looked at the beef on the table. It looked pretty good in terms of appearance. She sat down and tasted it. She looked at Zhang Haoze in surprise. When did you learn to cook? She really couldn't tell at all. Zhang Haoze didn't answer her question. How does it taste? Not bad. It was indeed not bad. Shi Mingwan was more curious about how he learned it. Zhang Haoze didn't say anything. Instead, he scooped a bowl of soup for her and placed it in front of her. Shi Mingwan had done this action many times before. Now that Zhang Haoze was doing the same thing to her, her heart suddenly felt warm. Many thoughts flashed through her mind. Those uncertain thoughts that wanted to resist seemed to have faded again because of the changes caused by Zhang Haoze's return. She couldn't resist him when he was cold and indifferent, and now that he was gentle, she couldn't resist him. What to do? Shi Mingwan. Are you going to sink into oblivion again? The taste of the food was to her liking, but she didn't really like it. She looked up at him and found that he was also looking at her. Her eyes were gentle and there was a faint smile on her face. Her heart skipped another beat. She rarely saw Zhang Haoze smiling like this. Do you have any plans for tomorrow? Zhang Haoze's voice brought Shi Mingwan back to her senses. She glanced at him. Yes, there's a design that needs to be fixed tomorrow. She had to change the client's request tomorrow. Very urgent? It's all right. They were all regular customers, so there was no rush. Then why don't you free a day and let's go play? Ah. Shi Mingwan was stunned. Go play? Where are we going? You can think about where you want to go. Shi Mingwan lowered her head to eat. Was he asking her out on a date? This time, wasn't he afraid of meeting someone he knew again? It's not the weekend, so there shouldn't be many people. So you can think about it. Shi Mingwan originally wanted to say that they should go to the new amusement park that opened this year, but when she met Zhang Haoze's eyes, she said, let's go to Mount Qin. I haven't climbed a mountain in a long time. Zhang Haoze's expression didn't change. He nodded lightly. Okay, then let's climb Mount Qin. He looked like he didn't think of anything, but it was also as if Mount Qin was just an ordinary mountain to him. Shi Mingwan's mood was inexplicably conflicted. Did he forget or, at night, Shi Mingwan looked at Zhang Haoze, who was sleeping beside her. She felt that he had changed a lot. Can't sleep? Zhang Haoze didn't do anything to her today. He just hugged her to sleep. No. Shi Mingwan turned over and wanted to sleep with her back to him. Zhang Haoze turned her body around again. His hand was a little unruly on her body. Shi Mingwan instinctively resisted. Stop fooling around. Aren't we going to climb the mountain tomorrow? It's okay. Zhang Haoze kissed her neck. If you can't climb anymore, I'll carry you. You? In the end, Shi Mingwan couldn't win against Zhang Haoze, so she let him have his way once. However, Zhang Haoze knew when to stop. He only came once and let her go. She couldn't sleep at first, but after being tormented by him like this, she fell asleep very peacefully. Shi Mingwan sat in the car. When she arrived at the foot of Mount Qin, she was still a little dazed. Ever since she got separated from her dear brother here when she was 13, she had never come here again. To her this was a sad place. She had always regretted it and was very upset. If she hadn't suggested coming here, her dear brother wouldn't have met those bad people, and she wouldn't have been separated from him. Shi Mengwan's emotions were complicated at this moment, but she looked at Zhan Haoze as if nothing had happened. Mount Qin had changed a lot compared to more than 10 years ago. A road had been built at the foot of the mountain, leading straight to the mountainside. This was originally a hilly area, so the mountain wouldn't be too high. Shi Mengwan sat in the car and watched the car go up the mountain. Finally, they stopped in the parking lot halfway up the mountain. When she got out of the car, she looked at the car in front of her and behind her. When she turned to face Zhan Haoze, she was a little conflicted. Can you not let them follow us? Okay. It was rare for Zhan Haoze to be so easy to talk to. Shi Mengwan heaved a sigh of relief. The scenery at the top of the mountain was quite good. Shi Mengwan didn't have many memories of Mount Qin. All her memories were of her dear brother being beaten, bleeding, and her loss. Now that her mood was different, she walked up and looked at the beautiful scenery on both sides. She was in the mood to appreciate it. She walked too fast and tripped over a small stone by the side of the road. Her body tilted, and Zhan Haoze quickly hugged her waist to stabilize her body. This scene was a little similar. She turned to look at him and her eyes were misty. Zhan Haoze looked at her snuggling in his arms and leaned over to kiss her. Shi Mengwan's face turned red for a moment, but Zhan Haoze let go of her at this moment. Let's go. Shi Mengwan lowered her head. She wanted to walk forward quickly, but Zhan Haoze held her hand. She was stunned again and turned to look at him. However, he held her hand and continued walking forward. It was actually a little cold in Lin City during this season, especially when the mountain wind blew. However, Shi Mengwan's hand was held by Zhan Haoze. His hand was very warm, very hot. That kind of heat made Shi Mengwan ignore the coldness in her hand. Other than the big rock that looked like a zither, there were a few other strange rocks in Mount Qin. Although it couldn't be compared to a famous mountain like Mount Huang, the scenery was quite good. The two of them went up the mountain together. Because it wasn't a weekend, there weren't many people. Shi Mengwan's playfulness finally came to an end after she saw the huge zither stone. She took out her phone to take a picture. The huge stone was like a huge zither because of the changes of time. Shi Mengwan's hand touched it and she turned to look at Zhan Haoze. She almost subconsciously said, "Dear brother, I'll climb up." Shi Mengwan didn't say anything else. More than 10 years ago, Mount Qin hadn't been developed yet. When it wasn't a tourist attraction, no one came here at all. She had once followed her dear brother and climbed up that huge zither. Now that she had grown up and there were tourists passing by the mountain from time to time, she was too embarrassed to climb up. Zhan Haoze held her waist. "Do you want to go up? If you want to go up, I'll carry you up." The stone zither was huge, so it was naturally very tall. Shi Mengwan shook her head. Realizing that she had made a mistake just now, her interest was halved. "No, I'd better be a civilized tourist." Looking at Zhan Haoze, she handed her phone to him. She didn't say anything, but Zhan Haoze understood what she meant. After taking a few photos, Shi Mengwan was about to take her phone back when a couple came up. They were also here to play. When they saw Shi Mengwan and the girl, their eyes lit up. "Beauty, help us take a photo together." Sure. Shi Mengwan didn't refuse. She took the other party's phone and took a photo of them. She took a few photos from all angles. When the girl took the phone, she thanked Shi Mengwan profusely. "Thank you, beauty. Your boyfriend is also very handsome. Why don't I take a photo for you guys too?" Before Shi Mengwan could say anything, Zhan Haoze had already handed the phone to the girl. The girl clicked her tongue. There was a hint of surprise in her eyes. The man was handsome and the woman was beautiful. Such a model was also very pleasing to the eye. Shi Mengwan was still a little uncomfortable when Zhan Haoze stood over. Zhan Haoze put his arm around her shoulder. They looked at the camera together. Shi Mengwan subconsciously curled the corners of her lips. At this moment, the hand on her shoulder suddenly exerted a little force. She looked at Zhan Haoze in confusion. At this moment, he leaned over and kissed her on the lips. Shi Mengwan's eyes widened, but she heard the sound of the camera. The scene froze there. Shi Mengwan was a little embarrassed. After the couple left, she quickly left Zhan Haoze's side. Other than this huge rock that looked like a zither, there were also some other rocks of different shapes on Mount Qin. Shi Mengwan didn't have a deep memory of the time she came here when she was young. Her mood was different when she revisited this old place. She turned to look at Zhan Haoze and he was also looking at her. She wanted to ask him a few times if he was her dear brother, but in the end there was only silence. Forget it, why ask again? Even if she asked, Jean Hausa wouldn't admit it. Opening her heart, Shi Mingwan let herself play happily. As for the rest of the things for now. It was almost noon when they came down from Mount Qin. The two of them got into the car. Shi Mingwan was tired. She stayed in the office every day and this trip to the mountain was a little tiring. On the other hand, Jean Hausa. His expression didn't change and he was calm and composed. It didn't affect him at all. Compared to other people, the difference was really big. When the car passed by the foot of the mountain, Shi Mingwan looked outside. That was the place where she had lost contact with her dear brother. She turned to look at Jean Hausa, but he didn't react at all. Was he really her dear brother? She couldn't forget those memories in time for so many years, but Jean Hausa seemed to have completely forgotten. Did he have some accident and lose his memory, or was there some inside story that she didn't know? She thought of Jean Hausa's current status. It was already different from the past. Perhaps that experience of being a hooligan wasn't what he wanted. Was that why he avoided talking about it? Was that so? Are you hungry? What do you want to eat for lunch? Jean Hausa's face enlarged in front of her. Shi Mingwan realized that she was actually staring at Jean Hausa and felt a little embarrassed. Whatever. Jean Hausa glanced at her and wasn't annoyed. The car finally stopped at a very famous Western restaurant in the center of Lin City. Shi Mingwan followed Jean Hausa into the door. Before the two of them could sit down, someone who knew Jean Hausa came over. When the other party saw Jean Hausa, he came over to greet him. When Jean Hausa was exchanging pleasantries with the other party's gaze swept over Shi Mingwan. Shi Mingwan felt a little uncomfortable and wanted to pull her hand back, but she felt Jean Hausa put his arm around her shoulder and introduced her very calmly, "This is my girlfriend." She was stunned on the spot. Did Jean Hausa know what he was talking about? She didn't even notice that person's ambiguous gaze. After all, at this stage, everyone who knew Jean Hausa knew that he had a fiancée. Now he had another girlfriend. However, looking at Jean Hausa's gaze, that person wouldn't look for trouble. He left after saying hello. After that person left, Shi Mingwan stood there and looked at Jean Hausa. "Do you know what you're talking about? You're my girlfriend to begin with." Jean Hausa looked at her. "I promised you." She wanted a status, so he would give her a status. Shi Mingwan sat there and looked at Jean Hausa, who was completely different from her memories. She couldn't help but feel her heartbeat quicken. Once again she was moved by the heart in front of her. 1-1. Jean Hausa held her hand. With a focused expression he said, "Come back to Qing City with me." At this moment Shi Mingwan couldn't say anything to reject him. She just stared at Jean Hausa in a daze. She actually had an uncontrollable urge in her heart. She really wanted to throw everything aside and go with him. In the next few days, Jean Hausa and Shi Mingwan seemed to have returned to that period of time. He was very busy. After all, he had to deal with a lot of work this time and then prepare to go to Qing City. But every night he would definitely have dinner with her. Shi Mingwan's apartment was very small. Jean Hausa suggested that she change places, but she didn't want to. She wasn't sure how long Jean Hausa could maintain his current appearance. More importantly, if he wanted to leave one day. What was she going to do? A week passed and Jean Hausa seemed to be even busier. Shi Mingwan knew that he was busy, so she didn't plan to disturb him. She also took this opportunity to negotiate with the two OEM factories. Song Seeking Studio could also be considered to have taken a big step forward. Shi Mingwan was in a good mood. Thinking about how her relationship with Jean Hausa was slowly getting better during this period of time, she suddenly had a sudden impulse and wanted to celebrate with Jean Hausa. Qin Feifei looked at Jean Hausa in front of her. After not seeing him for a week, the person in front of her seemed to have changed again. There was still a cold look in his eyes, but there was a hint of gentleness. Needless to say, this must be the power of love. She was really jealous of the woman who had Jean Hausa's heart. However, she knew better than anyone what the most important thing was right now. "Brother Hao, I'm sorry. It seems that I'll have to trouble you tomorrow." Qin Feifei thought that she was a very filial daughter. Therefore, she spent a lot of effort on Qin Yongchang's retirement home. In the end, she finally chose a small town in Canada. The environment was good and the people were simple. Everything could be said to be perfect. The only imperfection now was that Qin Yongchang didn't want to go. These few days, because of some of her and Jean Hausa's actions, he had been losing his temper at home. "You're welcome. I will naturally do what I promised you." It was very simple to bring Qin Yongchang onto the plane. It wasn't too difficult for Qin Yongchang to stay abroad for the rest of his life. There was a hint of mockery in Qin Feifei's eyes. "Do you know? My dad has been scolding me at home for the past few days. She had been in the company for the past few months, so she had some understanding of the company. It would still take time for her to completely snatch the company back into her hands. Qin Yongchang wanted to resist, but with Zhan Haoze around he was greatly suppressed. These few days Qin Yongchang had been scolding people at home. Of course he wasn't only scolding Qin Feifei, but also Zhan Haoze. He said that I have no conscience and that you're an ingrate. I think it's really funny. He was the one who said that everything in the Qin family would be mine in the future. Why is he so angry now that I just got it in advance? Zhan Haoze couldn't answer her question. Qin Feifei smiled. Forget it. Let's not talk about him. Brother Hao. Let's have lunch together. Before Zhan Haoze rejected her, Qin Feifei raised her index finger. Don't be in a hurry to reject me. That old fox from Deshang Corporation has arranged to meet at noon today. You know that he has always been lustful. I'm afraid I'll suffer a loss in his hands. Anyway, you've helped me so much. I think you don't mind going to a meal with me, right? She leaned forward a little. If I can settle this deal with Deshang ahead of time, I can also establish my authority in the company ahead of time. Maybe I'll come out earlier to break off the engagement. Zhan Haoze was speechless, but that old fox, Deshang, did not have a good reputation. However, he had some connections behind him. There were benefits to cooperating with him, but this person had a bad reputation. Let's go. Even if Qin Feifei didn't say it, he would still help with these small favors. Thank you, Brother Hao. You're the best. Qin Feifei smiled innocently, looking the same as many years ago. Only they themselves knew that Qin Feifei's smile was completely different. After going downstairs before Qin Feifei got into the car, she hooked her arm around Zhan Haoze's. Brother Hao, I've wronged you. Act as a couple with me. Don't worry. Just this once. I promise I won't trouble you next time. When she gained a foothold in the Qin Corporation, she really didn't need Zhan Haoze to appear. She just needed to put on a show. Zhan Haoze glanced at her. At this point he seemed to be a little helpless. I didn't say I wouldn't help you. Thank you very much. The two of them got into the car together and headed to the place where Qin Feifei had agreed to meet. Zhan Haoze instructed someone to drive. What he didn't expect was that Shi Mingwan, who was across the street and wanted to explain things to Zhan Haoze, happened to see the scene of Zhan Haoze and Qin Feifei leaving arm in arm when she saw him come out. With a cold face, she watched Zhan Haoze bring Qin Feifei into the car with a doting expression. She also saw Qin Feifei's overly bright smile. That scene looked like a loving and affectionate couple. Shi Mingwan suddenly felt that all the words of love she had heard yesterday had turned into a joke. She sat in the car and gripped the steering wheel tightly. There was no trace of emotion in her eyes. Shi Mingwan watched as the shocking motorcade left the building of Zhan Haoze's company. She also got into the car and started the car to leave. However, this time she wasn't going back to the studio. Instead, she was going home. That day, not only did Zhan Haoze accompany Qin Feifei to complete the Deshang project, he also made a trip to the Qin Corporation. Appearing with Qin Feifei could be considered as establishing his prestige. After so many days in the Qin Corporation, his prestige wasn't much inferior to Qin Yongchang's. Many people had always regarded him as the future head of the Qin Corporation. Now that Qin Yongchang said that he was not feeling well and needed to recuperate, the person who took over was Qin Feifei. Everyone was a little worried, but when they saw Zhan Haoze, there was nothing to worry about. After all, with Zhan Haoze around, the Qin Corporation would only get better and better. Qin Feifei looked at the way those people looked at Zhan Haoze and clicked her tongue. Big Brother Hao, your existence is like a great Buddha. With you around, these people won't dare to look down on me. Thank you for supporting me. You're welcome. Zhan Haoze was expressionless. I'm just returning your favor. Tisk, you've returned the favor of saving my life just like that. Why do I feel like I'm at a loss? Qin Feifei couldn't be bothered to hide herself in front of Zhan Haoze now. Zhan Haoze glanced at her. Or would you like uncle to stay? No need. Qin Feifei didn't dare to tease him anymore. All right. I promise you we're even. Zhan Haoze entered her office and looked at some of the recent cases of the Qin Corporation. He then roughly told Qin Feifei some things to pay attention to. After all, Qin Feifei studied business, so she took over these things very quickly. He believed that even if he returned to Qing City in 2 days, it wouldn't affect him much. He spent the entire afternoon at the Qin Corporation. He rejected Qin Feifei's suggestion to have dinner together. He was going to have dinner with Shi Mingwan. You're so anxious to see your sweetheart. I really want to meet her. Jean Hausa glanced at her and didn't respond. Before everything was completely stable, he didn't want Shi Mengwan to appear in front of Qin Feifei. After leaving the Qin Corporation, he went straight back to Shi Mengwan's apartment, but he found that she wasn't at home. Jean Hausa was stunned for a moment. At this time, she should have already returned from the studio. Looking at the empty house, he took out his phone and made a call. Shi Mengwan didn't pick up his call. He called again but no one picked up. Later, Shi Mengwan's phone was turned off. Holding his phone, he looked at the living room in front of him in a daze. What was Shi Mengwan doing? 10 minutes later, Jean Hausa's men brought news. Shi Mengwan had gone home. Go home. Why was she going home at this time? You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.